Meeting Friday, November 16th, 2012 at 3 o'clock. If we could have a roll call, please.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Burnett. Here. City of Delray Oaks, Vice Chair Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Good
City
timing.
of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge. Here. Monterey County Supervisor Calcagno. Monterey County Supervisor Parker. Here. Monterey County Nick Chulos.
Here.
City of Pacific Grove, Councilmember Camp.
Here.
City of Salinas, Mayor Donahue. City of San City, Mayor Pendergrass.
Here.
City of Seaside, Mayor Bachhoffner. City of Seaside, Councilmember Oglesby. Vice Chair Edelin, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We'll soon be going into closed session. The topics of closed session will be conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, government code 54956.9 alpha, 4 cases. 3 of the cases involve Keep Fort Ord Wild versus the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. The case numbers are M116438, M114961, and M119217. There's also a case, the City of Marina versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, case number M118566. And we'll be having a conference with legal counsel with regard to anticipated litigation, government code 54956.9 Bravo, 2 cases. Prior to going into a closed session, does any member of the public have any public comment with regard to any of the items we're going to be discussing in closed session? If not, then we are now adjourned in our open session. We'll reconvene in closed session. Thank you. Should be back in about half an hour. Okay, we're reconvened in open session. If we could have another roll call, please.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Burnett.
Here.
City of Delray Oaks, Vice Chair Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Brown.
Here.
City of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge.
Here.
Monterey County Supervisor Calcagno. Monterey County Supervisor Parker.
Here.
Monterey County Nick Chulos.
Here.
City of Pacific Grove, Councilmember Camp.
Here.
City of Salinas, Mayor Donahue. City of San City, Mayor Pendergrass.
Here.
City of Seaside, Mayor Bachhoffner.
Here.
City of Seaside, Councilmember Oglesby.
Here.
17th Congressional District, Alec Arago. 15th State Senate District, Crystal Clark. 27th State Assembly District, Assemblymember Monning. University of California, Graham Bice. California State University, Justin Wellner. Monterey Peninsula College, Dr. Garrison.
Here.
Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, Dan Alpert Jr.
Here.
Monterey Salinas Transit, Mike Gallant. Here. Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Todd Muck.
Debbie Hale here.
Debbie Hale. United States Army, Colonel Clark.
Here.
Fort Ord BRAC Office, Bill Collins. Here. Marina Coast Water District, Howard Gustafson. Here. Vice Chair Edelin, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Since we're so close to Veterans Day, I'd ask Colonel Clark if you would do us the honor of leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Colonel Clark. Okay, next on the agenda is the acknowledgement period, announcements and correspondence. I'd just like to lead off and acknowledge that it was Delray Oaks that won the Veterans Golf Tournament for the Heroes Open. So that's the most important announcement, and Delray Oaks leads the way. We may be small, but we can play golf. I'll turn it over. Okay. Okay. Michael?
Just to add a note of that Heroes Open was able to raise about $20,000 for the cemetery project last weekend.
I need to report out from the closed session. The board heard from its 3 legal counsel and gave direction. No reportable action was taken.
Thank you. Michael, any other announcements? Okay, how many folks here would like to speak during the public comment period? Just get an idea of how many people we have wanting to speak. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's reasonable. Let's go ahead and start with the public comment period. You've got 3 minutes to speak on any subject not on today's agenda, please. and please keep it to within 3 minutes so we can get keep the agenda moving quickly. Okay, first public comment speaker, please.
Rex Ronald Cheshire, 1112 Sylvan Road, Monterey, California. Oui, mesdames et messieurs, my name is Chez Rex, W-R-E-C-K-S, Rex. I am here today as a professional chef, a cook, a master chef, the executive chef of Club Sierra in Carmel Valley. I was in hopes that Monsieur Parteur would be here today so I could congratulate him on his election, where he kicked the crepe out of Del Piero. A little joke, cooking joke. I guess it gave him the fits. Okay. So anyway, voila. Before my eyes, look, Mademoiselle Parker, I haven't seen you in years, since we were students at Cordon Bleu in Francais. You're still so beautiful. You look as young as ever. I'm not quite as thin as I used to be. She was quite the hottie, a hot chef doing haute cuisine, the fancy cooking of France. She was always a good baker also, magnifique. But today I'm here because my employer, Club Sierra, has told me that you need an excellent chef to do what is needed for the community. And I am blending up a special sauce here. We have the finest of French wine. We have the secret ingredient that our friends at Club Sierra seem to like quite a bit. It makes a nice brownies, but what's this? Felix, my assistant, I thought I told you to take and put another label on this. I'm going to demote you to pot washer. But anyway, the taste of the people at Club Sierra is very exclusive. They like everything just their way, no other way. I cook for them, and they keep me employed. They don't pay me quite as much money as the two attorneys, Stamp and Erickson, but I did get overtime at her birthday party, October 31st. So, again, what we want to emphasize in Club Sierra is that if you want the best of cooking, you have to eat what we want, to our taste, to what we like, and that's what I cook for them. And it's our opinion that if you really don't like our cooking, we don't give a damn what you want.
Time.
So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chef Ron. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Well, it's going to be hard to come out, right after the chef, but my name is Eileen Sanchez, and I've been asked to read the following statement. Dear FORA board members, the FORA reuse plan was a compromise pro-environment. The compromise included two other crucial elements as well. First, that a significant portion of the land will be used to establish and strengthen educational institutions from throughout the Central Coast region. Second, that 30% of the land will be used to help create good jobs and housing for the impacted communities. So far, the one area of failure is the reuse plan is job creation. Unfortunately, some people are using that failure to argue that even more of the Fort Ord land, more than the 70% already designated, should be kept as open space for recreational users. This is an approach that contradicts the carefully crafted compromise that was reached in the Fort Ord reuse plan. The reuse plan makes clear that FORA is meant to serve all people in all communities within the Central Coast region, and not just a group of people with a single agenda. This means that FORA must serve people who need good jobs as well as people who seek recreational opportunities. FORA cannot sacrifice one for the other. We still need jobs, perhaps even more so than when FORA adopted the reuse plan. Whatever change has occurred since then, three things remain constant. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the working families still need good jobs. Please continue to support the carefully crafted compromise to use a relative small portion of the Fort Ord to create jobs for working families. FORA must serve all people of the Central Coast region, including working families. Respectfully submitted by 7 elected officials, which includes Supervisor Fernando Armenta, Supervisor Simon Salinas, Mayor of City of Soledad, Fred Ledesma, Mayor of City of Greenfield, John Huerta, Mayor-elect City of Seaside, Ralph Rubio, former Mayor of Salinas, Ana Caballero, Trustee of Salinas Unified School District, Phil Tavera, and includes 16 additional city civic leaders, and this is a partial list.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Levon Stone, Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network. I would like to let you know that the Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network will be making a formal presentation to the FORA board and community, because there seems to be some misunderstanding about what environmental justice means, and that for the last 20 years since the base closed, we have been representing impoverished community people and those who don't have a voice and don't feel that they can come to these meetings and be treated as equals. And we have also asked for a hearing on environmental justice, not environmental justice, a hearing on military Superfund sites, because we feel like the importance of the communities to know that there is laws, regulations, and procedures that guide the way all of these base closures take place and what happens to the communities in the interim. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please. Any other speakers? Going once, going twice. Okay, public comment period is closed. Next on the agenda is consent agenda. We've got three items on the consent agenda. Let's try and see if we can get all of these three done at the same time. Any member of the board wish to pull any items for questions? Yes, Nancy? Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Yes.
I would recuse myself also from A and B. I was not at those meetings.
Thank you, Nick. Any member of the public wish to pull any items for discussion, questions? If not, back to the board. Do I have a motion? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, next we're going into old business. We've got 5 items. I would ask, some of these items may be somewhat controversial. We all remember that there may be more than one honorable position on these things. Try and be as logical as possible. Don't take things personally. Try to be as factual as you possibly can. And if you want to make a comment or whatever, please go through the chair. There's some folks here that aren't as experienced in Robert's Rules of Order, so just raise your hand or whatever else. I'll recognize you, and then you can go ahead and speak. Okay, the first item is Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement Status Report. I'll turn this over to Michael Hulamard.
Yes, thank you, Chair Edelin and members of the board this evening. We have with us Barry Steinberg, who is with the law firm of Q-Tac Rock in Washington, D.C. Barry Steinberg and George Schlossberg have been counsel to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority since the 1990s. Barry was a special counsel to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority from 2005 to 2007 with respect to the negotiations and actions that were required to enter into an environmental services cooperative agreement with the U.S. Army to complete the munitions and explosives of concern cleanup on about 3,300 acres of the former Fort Ord. Barry has quite an extensive background in military and munitions work. He served in Vietnam. He was a colonel in the United States Army Judge Advocate General Office. He was the head of the United States Army Environmental Law Division. and has had a practice in dealing with military base reuse and environmental issues for about 22 years. And reflected in that will be his presentation tonight to give the community a full understanding of the scope and conditions under which we operate the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement. Barry has done this in the past. In 2005, when we initiated the negotiations to enter an agreement with the Army, Barry participated in those and presented to the board. And then again in 2007, when the actual agreements that he will talk about tonight were entered into. Mr. Steinberg.
Thank you. Members of the board, there's slides up behind you, and it's going to take a few minutes. You may want to turn your chair so that you won't spend the weekend with an ice pack on your neck. Members of the public, quite frankly, this is primarily directed to you, and it is an outgrowth. Can you hear me? Yeah. This is an outgrowth of a public session that I attended here 2 months ago. And I listened to a presentation put on by FORA's contractor, and there were a number of questions from the audience. And the questions from the audience convinced me that there is either a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding in the community as to what FORA's role is, and more importantly, what FORA's role is not. And so this presentation is to kind of talk about how did we get here, what are we doing, and what is our responsibility, what are our goals, and if there are other responsibilities, who has them if it's not FORA. So with that, here's a little history. As you can see, Fort Ord as a training-based facility has been around since 1917. 1920 light infantry, which is a little bit of history repeating itself because when the base closed, it was also light infantry. 1990, FORA was designated on the Superfund list. Just for your information, we use the term Superfund, but it is not accurate. The actual statutory authority is the National Priorities List in the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. And the reason that Superfund is not accurate as a description is because military installations are not eligible for the Superfund, that fund which exists for cleaning up the most contaminated facilities in the United States, public and private. FORA only is eligible, the Army rather, is only eligible for funds appropriated into the Defense Environmental Restoration Account, which is a separate congressional appropriation. So we're not fighting with the ABC Chemical Company on private land for their cleanup. Having said that, we all use Superfund all the time, but be aware that there's a difference in the funding stream, and that becomes important because if Congress doesn't give Army money enough to do what has been identified, the Army has no place else to go to get that money. In 91, there was a decision to close Fort Ord, and under the statute, it took 6 years to do that. Closure does not mean cleanup. Closure means you have to cease all of your military activities except minimal caretaker operations. So by 1997, that had effectively happened. During the period that it was an active base, there were a number of training activities here involving live fire, and it ran the gamut. It was everything you would have expected at a large military installation. Small arms, grenades, mortar, artillery. There were maneuver areas all over this base. Unfortunately, because of the age of the installation, the record keeping is not all that great to tell you what went on where. And that is one of the two complicating factors in cleaning up Fort Ord. It's not like we dump something over there, go over there and fix it. We don't know where some things happen. We find things as we proceed, but we don't have an archive where we can look at it and see every maneuver area, every place that a grenade was ever thrown. In addition to that, soldiers being soldiers, sometimes things don't end up where they're supposed to go. For those of you that have served in the military, think about a 3-day weekend where Friday is the payday and you get paid once a month, and you now are coming back from the range and you have a case of grenades that you didn't throw, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and all you want to do is go downtown and drink and you've got this case of grenades and you're driving back on the road, and you can either go stand in line for 2 hours to turn in the case of grenades, or you can stop, take out your entrenching tool, for those of you that remember what that was, dig a hole, bury the case of grenades, and go on and get the drink in 2 hours earlier. If we look along some of the road networks out here, we find things buried that nobody would have expected to be there. And that's just the nature of the risk of what we're dealing with here. There are surface and soil contamination out here. Mostly we're dealing with munitions and explosives of concern. That's important because that's all FORA agreed to do. There is groundwater contamination out here, and that's how Fort Ord actually got on the National Priorities List, the Superfund list. It was because of a groundwater issue. But once you're on the list, your whole base is on the list, groundwater and surface and soils. And so what we have negotiated with the Army, and I'll come back to this, is we'll take the MEC issue, the munitions and explosives of concern. Now, the other complicating factor that I mentioned, I already told you that sometimes you don't know where the stuff is, and that's a problem. The other problem is the nature of munitions. For reasons that are sort of logical but lost in a fog of history, we have decided as a nation that we will accept a certain level of risk. The risk is typically expressed as 1 times 10 to the minus 6. And for the high school algebra trigonometry teachers in the audience, you will know that that is 1 in a million. If there is no more than 1 in a million lifetime exposure increase in cancer, somehow that has become okay. That becomes the gold standard for you've cleaned it up. The problem is that when you deal with MEC issues, you're dealing with a binary equation. It's either a 1 or a 0. It either goes bang or it doesn't. And if it goes bang, it's not a question of a lifetime exposure. You can lose your life, you can lose your eye, you can lose a limb, you can be seriously injured. So the traditional risk analysis of 1 times 10 to the minus 6 just doesn't work. And I can promise you that some very, very smart people in this country have tried to develop the algorithm approach, the mathematical approach for assessing MEC risk. And no one has come up with a satisfactory way to do it. And so that has caused the regulatory community to have a very, very high threshold before they'll say it's okay. The Army, on the other hand, not for bad reasons, had a very different approach to how they would look at risk. And I remember a briefing that I attended where the briefer, who happens to be an old friend of mine in the Army, stood up and said, we have 95% degree of certainty that we have discovered and removed all of the MEC in the first 3 feet of soil. And being the contrarian that I am, sitting in the back of the room, I raised my hand and said, let me translate what I just heard. What I just heard you say was, there's a 5% risk that there's still MEC out there that can hurt somebody in the top 3 feet, and you don't have the foggiest idea of what's lower than 3 feet down. And he said, well, I didn't say it that way. I said, no, the question is that accurate? And the answer is, yes, that is an accurate assessment. And the regulators were never going to be happy with that approach. So FORA is now sitting here trying to say, okay, we want the property. We didn't ask the Army to leave, but if you're going to leave, this is prime real estate. Give me something I can do to replace the economic benefit, or if the decision is it's going to be open space or soccer fields or hiking trails, whatever it's going to be, give me the land to use it. And the Army's problem was a provision in CERCLA, in the Superfund statute, peculiar to federal facilities, which Fort Ord was and is, the part of it is. And it's a requirement in the statute, 9620H3 of Title 42, that the deed has to include in it a covenant warranting that all action necessary to protect human health and the environment has been taken. And the use of the term has been taken means it's a condition preceding to transfer. If you haven't taken it, you cannot transfer title to the real estate. And that was the hang-up. Now, that's not necessarily a bad provision of law. It kind of protected the community from itself because it couldn't get the hands on the property until all that action had been taken. So that becomes an important hurdle to get over. In the meanwhile, the Army, a center of excellence down in Huntsville, did a job which by 1980s, 1990s standard was considered to be as good as it was. And they developed a mathematical analysis called grid stats. And it was how the Army would come out to Fort Ord or other places with mech risk, and they would study and determine whether it was safe or not. Well, EPA got into that act early on and spent a lot of time studying the grid stats formula. And ultimately, EPA, and the unfortunate thing is EPA put this memorandum out only to itself. They sent this to their regional offices. So people like me never saw it when it came out. I stumbled on this years later, doing some other research. But this is what their memo said. We have expressed concern relative these techniques, these being grid stats. We think there's a problem here, and here are the reasons. And you can read the technical reasons, and we'll get you copies of these slides. I think they're going to go up on the FORA website, I think. They are. They're already there? Okay, so you'll have access to all this, and you can, go blind trying to understand all this stuff. The problem was they put this out, and then they listed about 20 installations where grid stats had been used for the Army to declare, we're finished, we're successful. And they specifically identified in the EPA memo Fort Ord as a place to be very careful about, because the Army's grid stats approach to doing business was not viewed by EPA as an effective and safe way to render the property suitable for a transfer where they could say all action necessary has been taken. Now, in the meanwhile, there was a growing community concern, which was, guys, you left. Give me the real estate. This is Monterey Bay. If you can't do something economically beneficial or otherwise beneficial to the community in Monterey Bay, there's something wrong with you. Give us the land. But the problem was that everybody said, well, listen to what the regulators are saying. DTSC and EPA are saying maybe they haven't cleaned it up enough yet. So we want the property. We want it cleaned up. The Army hasn't gotten there. The regulators are not signing off saying we're satisfied, we're happy. In addition to that, if you understand the federal budget process, the federal budget process is iterative. If they decide that they need $6 billion to build the next aircraft carrier, you may not see all $6 billion in the 2013 National Defense budget. They may put in $1 billion here, and then when you're 20% through, they'll give you another $2 billion, and it comes out year by year by year. The same is true for the environmental cleanup budget. The Defense Environmental Restoration Account never gets 100% of what is needed to clean up. And so the Army found itself at Fort Ord in a position where they had an identified requirement of what they needed to do, but each year they'd get a little bit of money to do it. So they might get $3 million to go do something. They'd hire a contractor. The contractor would come in and mobilize, do the work, demobilize, and go home. The next year they may have the identical piece of work 50 feet away, hire another contractor, go through the procurement process. They come out, they mobilize, they do the work, they demobilize. So you never had a guarantee of long-stream funding, and you were paying to mobilize and demobilize contractors over and over and over again. So you might have had a $20 million project, but by the time it was finished, you had escalating costs because you couldn't get it all done at one time. You lost economies of scale, and you were paying for mobilization and demobilization. You may well have spent $40 million to do $20 million worth of work if you had funded it all at one time. That was a concern, and that created some delays in the process. And as I indicate, we wanted the property for whatever the local community decides to do with it. Here I'm going to divert for just a moment because this has reached the level of urban myths. Everybody knows the story about the alligators in the New York subways, right? People from New York go to Florida. They buy these little baby alligators for their pets. They bring them back home. The alligator gets bigger, outgrows the bathtub. So they take them out, open up a sewer drain, they put the alligator down in the sewer drain. And now you've got all these alligators underneath New York City. One of the funniest, but believed by some people, urban myths in history. Okay? I'm going to give you another urban myth. The Army was there, the Army did a surface sweep, the Army said it was clean, the Army's finished, therefore the property's safe. Bunk. Not true. Here is a recent example I'm going to pull out from something we just did within the last 12 months. We went out to one of the interim action range areas. There was 231 acres. Of that, 43 acres were identified as problem areas, if you will. We never say problem. We say things like special case or non-completed areas. This is south of Parker Flats, adjacent to the inland range. The Army had gone out there to clean it up for a 10-year period, 97 to 2007. They did burn activities, and they did a surface clearance. And when they finished the surface clearance, in essence, they said, we finished the surface clearance. Now, some people in Monterey area will say, well, they did a surface clearance. Why can't I go out there now and run around and run my dogs and do whatever I want to do? Well, you can if you're really trying to create three-legged dogs. Otherwise, it's not a very smart thing to do. FORA, through the ESCA program, which I'll describe in more detail, went out after the Army had left, all within the last year, went out to Range 47 in the special case area of 14 acres. We did brush removal and investigation, which led to screening and removal, because of what they detected, of 44,000 cubic yards of soil. Then they went in and did the digital geophysical mapping, which is the technology that we use to see down through the dirt. In there, they found 91 40-millimeter high explosive munitions and explosives of concern. 91. Now, let me explain what we're talking about here. These are not ancient from 1917. They're Vietnam era. They're sensitively fused anti-personnel rounds. They were designed to hurt and kill people. They had a maximum fragmentation distance. Catch this, 339 feet. That's more than a football field away. This thing is, what, maybe this big. It's not a huge device. When it goes bang, it will throw its fragmentation pieces out as much as 339 feet. If you're in the first 120 feet of that circle, of that blast area, you are hurt, seriously. Death, loss of limb, loss of sight, things like that. They found 8,200 pounds of 40-millimeter debris, which tells you this area, it wasn't an inadvertent burial on the way back on payday weekend. This was a training area where this particular munition was used a lot. And they found 557 other pieces of munitions and explosives of concern. This is all within a roughly 14-acre site. You know, pretty intense use there. Currently, they're out replacing the 44,000 cubic yards of soil, and there some erosion control measures went into it. And we're implementing a habitat restoration program, which involved, interestingly enough, 45,000 native species of plants, which were grown from seeds that were harvested here. We actually created the nursery, Arcadis did, that took the seeds from local plants, nurtured them, and then went out and planted them in the area to revegetate the area. Now, what's significant here, though, is this is the urban myth. The urban myth is, well, you don't need to worry about it. Not true. And this is not an isolated incident out there. This is something that the community needs to be concerned about. So, you know, when somebody brags about, you know, we went out there hiking through this area, the Army's a bunch of crap, tear down the no trespass, danger warning signs, which has happened a lot, okay? I mean, you're only putting the community members at risk. All of us that work in this project, we know where these areas are. You take the sign down, it's not like, oh, I forgot that was a place I shouldn't be, that I need to be careful about. Let us do our job, let us clean it up, then you can do what you want. And I'll come to that do to you one part in a minute. Okay. How do we address these problems that I've described as a community? I already told you about the circle of warranty, which is all action necessary has to be taken. There was another provision of law that amended that. And what it said was, you can defer that warranty. You don't have to give it, if there is a schedule, funding stream, you know what you're doing, you're going to take the environmentally protective measures, you can transfer it before that. You need, in the case of NPL property, the approval of the administrator of EPA with the concurrence of the governor of the state in which the property exists. That's the H3 C provision in the third line down in there. So we knew we had a way we could get it before it was clean, but what are we going to do if all we do is get a dirty piece of property that we can't do anything with? There was another statute that we looked at, which was it's actually part of the Defense Restoration Statute, and it's Title 10 United States Codes 2701D, and I've quoted it here, where you can give grant money to FORA or other governmental entities, which FORA is, to assist the Secretary, in this case of the Army, to carry out his responsibilities to investigate, identify, and clean up contamination. So we said, well, wait a minute. Why don't we combine the two? Why don't we do an early transfer with a deferred covenant if we can get enough money from the Army where we don't have to do with this start-stop annual appropriation process, and we put all the bells and whistles of protection around the process, and we'll do the cleanup. Now, critical issue here. We're not cleaning up our contamination. We are not the responsibility for the stuff that's out there. We didn't do it. This is a contract. The grant is written in the nature of a contract. We are the Army's contractor. We are not performing FORA's work. We're performing the Army's work under contract with a grant. And many of you have heard about that grant. The grant was roughly $98 million, and I'm not going to go through how it breaks down into where every penny went. Suffice to say, the Army, FORA, Arcadis, which agreed to do the work as FORA's contractor, subcontractor to the Army basically, and the insurance company, all of us independent of each other went out and looked at what's the risk, what's the problem, what's it going to cost, how long is it going to take. And out of all of our collective wisdom, with the regulators looking over our shoulder at every step, that's how we arrived at the scope of work for the MEC and the $98 million grant as being adequate. We took the $98 million grant and took a significant slice of that and went to the insurance company and said, if I give you this pot of money, roughly $67 million, anybody remember? I think it was about $67 million, plus a $5 million risk premium, give you $72 million. How much more will you give us if we blow through that 67? In other words, if we don't finish the work for 67, how much more coverage will you give us? And the bottom line is, we about doubled what we would get. The conclusion, when everybody did what is known as, again for you math teachers, did our Monte Carlo statistical modeling technique, everybody in the mix, Arcadis, FORA, the insurance company, and the Army, all understood independently that we were well above the 95th percentile of certainty that we would finish the work for less than the amount of money that we were being given and that we would have for the insurance policy. It's a very significant factor, because if you wonder, how do we know that we have enough? Well, we think we do, but in the event that we were wrong, we basically doubled the amount to cover the risk factor there. We spent about 18 months in negotiation with the Army and EPA and DTSC and the insurance company, negotiating all of these parts that had to come together to make this deal work. And quite frankly, if we had not been able to do that, FORA would have said, well, we gave it our best shot, it didn't work. The Army was anxious to do it because they understood that even though they had to give us all of our money up front, basically within about an 18-month period, that they would save money over the long run because we wouldn't have this start-stop escalation of funding stream. So we're doing this cheaper, better, quicker than the Army ever would have, quite frankly. Not because they're bad people, but they were hampered by their budget process. They couldn't freeze $97, $98 million for Fort Ord out of 1 year's budget. They couldn't do it. We obtained the approval of the EPA administrator. The governor, then governor, concurred in it. If we had not been able to put the two pieces together, early transfer plus the grant funds, we would not have done it. And that all came to the FORA board for the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement, which is our contractual relationship with the Army, the AOC, the Administrative Order on Consent, which is the EPA and DTSC regulatory requirement that tells us what we have to do, the LFR, now Arcadis contract, and the Chartist contract, the AIG, was AIG, then became Chartist, now it's AIG again, the cost cap insurance policy. All took place in about March of 2007. That then allowed us to get on with the actual work and get people like me out of the way so that the doers could go out and do the work they were hired for. Now, what's important here? The responsible party for the contamination is the Army. They have signed an agreement called the Federal Facilities Agreement with EPA, which is a requirement of the Comprehensive Environmental Liability Compensation Act. Environmental coordination, comprehensive environmental, it's not coordination, by the way, it's compensation. I don't know how that word got there. Compensation and Liability Act. They signed an agreement where they acknowledge it's their responsibility. If FORA were to disappear from the face of the earth tomorrow, and they all took their money and went to the Grand Cayman Islands to live out a successful life down there, the Army would be the responsible party. The Army would have to come back and fix it. They are not off the hook. They are the backstop. As long as FORA is viable, FORA is contractually obligated, but the statutory obligation is with the United States Army, not with FORA. In addition, as I said earlier, we took the MEC responsibility, but there is groundwater issue. There are groundwater issues out here. The groundwater issues remain the Army's responsibility, and the reason we did it that way is we can make beneficial use of the surface area. The groundwater is deep enough down that as long as you don't dig a well and drink it, you're not at risk from bad water. We couldn't get our arms around how long is it going to take and what is it going to cost to clean up the groundwater. It's essentially a pump and treat operation. It could go on for 30 or 40 years. We don't have better technology. And why would FORA take on a 40-year obligation out here? That's not giving the community near-term beneficial use. So we divided it up. We've got the surface and soils. Army keeps groundwater. Arcadis is a FORA competitively selected contractor. Originally it was LFR. They became Arcadis. It was a competition. There were five prominent companies that bid. Two of them, my recollection is, were non-responsive because they didn't want to do it the way we told them. We didn't want to pay them. What we said is, you come in and help us get the contract, and if we're able to do it, you can perform it. And as a result, at least two of them said, "No, we really need to be paid for helping you, even if it's a failure." And we said, "Okay, you're not responsive to the contract, therefore, you're not going to the next step." They won the contract, and they've been performing ever since. Now, here is an important factor. There has been a notion, and this came out in the public hearing 2 months ago, that FORA is calling the shots, and Arcadis is calling the shots. That is not correct. When it comes to the cleanup of Fort Ord, FORA is the Army's contractor. We're not their agent. We are their contractor, and we perform for them. And in the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement, in Section 4.2.1, there is this specific provision. The Army shall review, comment, and approve all drafts of the plans, proposed plans, records of decision, and documents required pursuant to the regulatory order, the Administrative Order on Consent. We put them together. We make a recommendation. We do not make the final decision. But lest there be any question about that, here's the Administrative Order on Consent, which we have signed with DTSC and EPA. And I would point out to those of you that have not fallen asleep trying to read this document, it includes provision for stipulated penalties. If FORA violates the Administrative Order on Consent, EPA and DTSC have the authority to impose penalties on us. In some cases, $2,000 a day for noncompliance with our obligation, which can add up pretty quickly. Respondent FORA shall perform the work in accordance with Work plans or other plans, standard specs, and schedules approved by EPA. We make recommendations, they approve them. Section 26, the Army and/or EPA shall select a remedial action. We don't select it. We may make a recommendation about it. They don't have to accept it. They can come up with something different. Section 49 of the AOC, you'll see there are 5 options there which essentially cover all combinations and permutations of what's possible. They can approve in whole or in part, approve with conditions, modify, disapprove, and do any combination of these. They can come up with a whole new solution to the problem if they want. So the reason I show you this language is because I want it to be clear. We are the Army's contractor performing to someone else's requirements. We make recommendations. It's just like you take your car in and said the engine doesn't run right. And the mechanic takes it apart and he looks at it and he says, you know, you got a major problem with your valves here. We need to grind the valves back out. Well, he's not making the decision. He's telling you what he thinks ought to be done. You're free to say, nope, I don't want to spend godzillion dollars to do that. Or he says, well, then why don't you replace the whole engine? Nope, I'm not doing that either. And you drive it out and it dies 6 weeks later on the highway. But the point is, that's who we are. We are the mechanic in the shop. We like to think we're more technical than he is, but that's the work we do. Somebody else has to decide whether we do it or not. Here is another critical issue that is obvious to me from the questions I heard last time. This is not understood in the community. And this is FORA's charter. FORA exists by virtue of a California legislative enactment improved by the governor. Health and Safety Code, still good on the law. I know that there's, this redevelopment authority thing was taken away from some communities last year that were in the base closure universe. This did not change, and that law, by the way, had minimal effects on us. But this article shall govern the establishment and operation of all redevelopment project areas created within the area previously known as Fort Ord. Then you get, I've skipped out some other provisions, and I went straight to Part C, and I put the whole thing in there. And it talks about what we can do. What is important here is what we can't do. What we can't do is the planning, zoning, and permitting decisions with respect to land use. If the property in question sits in the middle of a jurisdiction, I'll pick one, like it's somehow we all became part of San Luis Obispo, okay? And Fort Ord is now dealing with their land. Fort Ord's job essentially is a cleanup job. We don't decide what the zoning density is going to be. If a community wants to build a 10-story building on 4 acres with a density of 300 apartment units in there for whatever reason, which doesn't sound like the highest and best use to me for the community, but if they came to that conclusion, that's their decision. The land use authorities are the municipal governments, not Fort Ord. Not FORA. FORA has no police power. When we have an incident involving the police, like trespassing in an area, we don't have a police force that goes out there. The land use municipal jurisdictions are the law enforcement authority. They are the zoning authority, the permitting authority. They make the decision of what goes there. FORA may make the decision with their input of, I'm going to clean this to a residential level. Some in the community have concluded that if we clean it to a residential level, that ordains that it's going to be used for a residential purpose. Keep in mind that residential use is usually in the environmental world the highest level you can get to. It means the children can go in the backyard and eat the dirt. That's what residential use translates into. Okay? We think that it is to everyone's advantage to clean this property to the highest use level. That has nothing to do with what the local jurisdiction decides to do with the land. That's very, very important. So, 2 things to keep in mind here. We don't make land use decisions. The local community does that has land use authority. And we are the Army's contractor performing pursuant to their contract, their approval, and the regulatory authority's approval. Now, That obviously, to me, from the session I was at 2 months ago, has been lost. The conclusions, FORA's mission, protect human health and the environment. We are a contractor, not a responsible party. We don't have zoning entitlement authority. FORA's board approved what we're doing out here long ago. We will clean up to a level that is appropriate for cleanup, not for reuse. What happens to reuse is somebody else's decision. And the satisfaction of the cleanup is an Army EPA determination. Now, sir, what I would suggest is, and I've arranged this with Michael, if there are questions from the board, if there are questions from the board, I'd like to take those now. If there are questions from the audience, as some of you may know, there is a conference room at the FORA headquarters right next door. I'm going to go over there when I finish here. Anybody wants to come in, I'll sit there and answer your questions as long as you want to ask them, as long as they are not litigation related. So if you want to mind me for litigation issues, I'm not going to go there. But if it's the issues I've talked about here, I'm happy to answer your questions all night if that's what it takes. So, sir, if that's okay with you, I'll take the board questions.
Barry, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Any questions by board members? Yes, Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you go through the process again of what the agreement was between the Army and Arcadis and AIG and all those folks? What's the amount of money that we have as a backstop if the cleanup costs exceed the, I think you said 67 million, we think of it as 98, but whatever. If the costs exceed what we've budgeted, how much more is the insurance company willing to kick in?
Sure. It's a little bit complicated, and I may screw up the numbers because I don't have them right here in front of me, and it's been 5 years since I negotiated this thing. Roughly, the first $67 million of cleanup came from the Army grant funds. We took that money plus, I believe, another $5 million and turned around and entered into a contract with Chartis. And so we gave them $72 million and said, how much will you give us in cost overrun? They came back, and I believe their number goes to about $125 million. So little less than double there. We could have bought insurance that would have gotten us to, I think, 140. Where's Michael? Michael, was it 100? We could have gone to 140 million. The Army said,
Yes.
We've run our numbers. We don't think you're ever going to get to 140. We said, you may well be right, but it is a risk that we're not prepared to take. And the Army said, well, it will cost the Army about another, I think, $2 million to get that extra $20 million of coverage. And they said, we will take that risk. We, the Army, will take that risk. So you've got layers. You've got the basic 67, then you've got the Arcadis, roughly another 60 or 65 on top of that, and then you've got the Army with the last tranche of another 20 million. So the bottom line is we have over $140 million of commitment to perform this work. Now there's another bump in this. Bump up, if you will. AIG said on their insurance policy, if they have to start to dig into my pocket on the cost overrun amount, that is, Arcadis didn't finish on the budget, we don't want them to get any profit. They will work at cost. So if their profit margin is 20%, okay, basically, that means that we're getting $1 million worth of additional work for $800,000. So that's another 20% that you can add into the value of the AIG insurance policy, which gets us up well above $150 million. We've run, like I said, we all ran the Monte Carlo models. We were above 90, all of us were above 95% at the $67 million level. And this is an asymptotic curve for the algebra guys in the audience. It's one of those curves where it just goes on and on. You never get to zero. You'll never get absolute certainty that you can finish it. But we are way out, a couple of sigma units to the right in terms of our degree of certainty on this work.
Thank you. And just one other question. In the part of what has focused people's attention on this is, among other things, what happened at Parker Flats. There was some discussion that it was going to be essentially clear-cut. Then now the process is a little more graduated, and trees will only be taken out if there's there's something of concern that can only be removed by removing the tree. I wonder if you could talk about how that change came to be.
Well, I think the starting point, though, is the concept of clear cutting. Clear cutting for those of us that have ever worked in the development world or, quite frankly, in the military. Clear cutting means you take everything down to the ground. There's nothing left that grows out there. We don't know where that concept came from at Parker Flats. We've huddled. We've tried to figure it out. We never said it. It was never our intention. Somehow your newspaper picked it up, and it sounds to me like they didn't come back and say, hey, what's really going on out there? They just reported it because somebody told them. And we don't know where it came from. But as a result of that, there was a whole lot of we did a lot of introspective thinking at that point, like, well, what's the community telling us? Community is telling us they like trees, and they don't want to see them chopped down needlessly. Do we need to chop them down? And as we worked through the process, the answer was clearly no. But we didn't have a real protocol to address that. This is one where the misinformation that grew and grew with respect to clear cutting actually produced a result. And the result was a protocol for how we're going to look at the issues at Parker Flats. Can we do the detection work that needs to be done without cutting down trees? We think so, but we're not sure. So the first step was get the brush out. There's a whole bunch of little miniature things that nobody's screaming about, nobody has a concern about. Don't touch the coastal oak. Get the brush out. Then go in with your screening devices, your digital detection devices, and how close around the tree can you get, and what do you see when you look down through the ground with these ground-penetrating devices. That's where we are right now. We are collecting the data, trying to figure out, are we able to see deep enough? How comprehensively is our site? How much interference do we get from the root system? And I think you were here when the arborist spoke 2 sessions ago. She was brought in by Arcadis to address the issue. And what she has described is an incredibly integral root system amongst these trees. They kind of all grow over top of each other. So you've got some thickness when you start to look down there. What we are hoping is that we will be able to see enough to know whether it's clean or not. So if we decide that we have to do cutting, the cutting will be selective, not clear cutting. And we will be able to defend whatever we cut. If we can't defend it in front of groups like this and possibly in court, because we've had a threat of litigation over that issue, if we can't defend it in court, we're going to be stopped, and we know that. So the objective is public health and safety is the number one objective here. Don't leave unexploded ordnance in the ground that you could have gotten out were it not for this desire to protect the trees. Because if you go there, you're going to have to fence the area off. You're not going to leave it as just open space for people to wander through. The regulators are not going to allow that. The regulators have said, okay, you can run this new protocol where you kind of clean out the scrub, then you go back in with your DGM equipment and look. But we're going to call the shot of whether you're going to have to do more. So the objective is not to cut down one tree that we don't need to cut down in order to protect human health and the environment. But it's not a clear-cut operation just because, if you ever wondered why does a developer in a residential area clear-cut? Well, He clear cuts because it's easier to build. You know, most people would like to have trees around their house, but you find these acres and acres that have been clear cut because it's cheaper, it lowers the price, or increases the profit. Well, we're not in that same mode. This is not about profit. This is about public protection of human health and the environment. If the regulators say we need to do more, we don't have a choice under the AOC. We will have to do it. And then whoever wants to sue us can fight with EPA over that issue, or DTSC. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions by board members?
Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
Frank.
if I may, through you to the legal authority, I am somewhat concerned, although I have absolutely nothing wrong, nothing against the short meeting. I am concerned that Barry has said that he would take questions from the public, and basically what is a closed session. I'd just like to know, since it's a public agenda item, are we required to have the public speak at this time in open session to ask the appropriate questions? I don't think it's appropriate to go basically to have Barry go into closed session with the public because one question may result in another question, but
Okay,
to the legal authority.
It would not be a closed session. It would just be, the idea was the interest of saving time, where if people had detailed questions with Mr. Steinberg, he can go through, he can speak hours on any subject whatsoever. If it's the public's a desire to hear these questions and go on a little later, we could do that. I'll ask our attorney what the legal ramifications are.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is the question whether we have to have public comment in advance?
No,
of
the question is, Mr. Steinberg is volunteered to go, not in closed session, but just next door and speak to anybody in detail about any subject whatsoever about what we've talked about right here in the interest of time to move the agenda forward.
And can he do that?
And is that legally permissible to do?
Yes. Yes. I mean, people can meet with anybody that they want. I mean,
Okay, how many people would like to ask Mr. Steinberg a question? Just a show of hands, please, just to get an idea.
well, people, we do have to.
Yeah, comment period.
We do have to have a comment period.
Right.
We do have to hear any comments that people have. Certainly, we can't foreclose that just by giving them an alternative to talk to somebody in another room.
It's Friday afternoon. We're trying to get everybody here before midnight, so that was the intention. So if we don't have that many questions, well, right now, Barry, anybody have any questions of Mr. Steinberg at all about his presentation? Yes, sir. Come on forward, please, to the microphone. And yeah, I can't hear you. You have to go to the microphone, please.
Let me clarify. We're talking about two different things, and just so that the members of the public will understand that what's happening right now is we're giving members of the public an opportunity to comment on this item on the agenda. Then when that's all finished, we're going to give members of the public an opportunity to meet with Mr. Steinberg in the conference room.
Yeah, can I make a suggestion? Maybe we ask questions to Mr. Steinberg after the following items come up. He's had, an hour and a half, almost an hour of our time. So can we just have him stay in the room and wait till the other items have been attended to?
Right now, we've got the agenda going. He's also a very accomplished, somewhat expensive attorney in trying to keep the FORA expenses down. They're taxpayer expenses that you and I pay for. We'd like to, if you've got your questions right now, if you'd like to very quickly ask a question, that's fine. And he'll also stay after for a while in the FORA conference room. Any other members of the board have any questions of him or comments?
Through the chair.
Yes. Ian.
Somehow we got confused what Mr. Steinberg said. He said he would answer the questions in regular session like we normally do.
Right.
And after we move the agenda, if someone wanted to ask him a question later on, and I think the attorney was clear, he can stay and go and talk to anybody he wants to talk to. But I want to make sure people know that you're trying to do regular order.
Right.
This is nothing unusual.
Right.
And if they want to come up and ask us questions, but after a while we do have to move on,
Right.
whether that's an hour from now or 2 hours from now.
Hopefully not an hour or two.
Right, but he was not saying all the questions on this agenda item
Right.
is going to go over there.
Right.
That's not what he was saying.
Thank you, Ian. Any other comments or questions from the board? If not, out to the public. Any questions from the public or comments?
Yvonne Stone, Florida Environmental Justice. I didn't understand a lot of the presentation, but I did understand the last part of it. And I take offense at the use of the word community. Everything that is said, the word community comes up. And the community is more than our mayors and the people in City Hall. The community is the people who live here, the local residents who have been impacted by all of this and who are in this thing up to their neck and don't know how to get out of it because they are not the participants. They are not the ones that are at the table saying, okay, these are the decisions that we are participating in, and this is what we have to say about it. And even when it comes to increases in wages or decreases in housing or whatever, increases in housing, we are not abreast to the decisions that are being made beforehand, before time, and these decisions are really affecting us in a way that nobody seems to be mindful of. And I really take offense to that. And I really want to encourage everybody to look at how you're using the people in the communities and not giving them a fair chance to participate, not even our organization. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other comments from the public? Okay, as Mr. Steinberg said, he will be right next door if you want to go talk to him in questions about anything having to do with ESCA, FORA, the cleanup, or whatever. He is the expert. He'd be more than happy to talk to you. Try to keep it under a couple hours. We are paying for his services. Okay, next on the...
Mr. Chair, before
Yes.
we move
Yes.
to the next item, I just wanted to suggest maybe that the Parker Flats, the explanation for what happened at Parker Flats, I think really illustrates the need for whatever the process is now for how the ESCA recommendations get made from FORA to the regulatory agencies for approval. It seems that it might be helpful to have that process happen at a FORA board meeting so that there's an opportunity that's easily findable for the public to be able to hear what's being proposed at each different project area so that this kind of misunderstanding, if that's what it was, doesn't happen again and people have a chance to make comments.
Thank you, Jane. We'll try and do that.
Yes, Chair, I just wanted to make a very, very quick comment. Barry made a lot of comments about things that have to do with complying with local zoning and FORA's authority. That was not to say that FORA's authority with respect to consistency determinations has gone away someplace. It still exists. And number two, I think Barry made a number of comments about the Army's work and some of the restrictions that make it a little more difficult for the Army to do its work at Fort Ord or other places because of the Anti-Deficiency Act and the annual renewal funding. I just want to remind everyone that the work that we're doing on behalf of the Army is part of a very coordinated effort. The Army's done an extraordinary amount of wonderful work here at Fort Ord in munitions and explosives removal, and the work that we're doing is enhancing that in some areas directly at their specific point in time direction. So it's not to overplay this, but I think it's important to note the Army's work ongoing is just as good as the work that FORA is doing.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Preston Park fiscal year 2012-2013 capital expenditure budget continued. Mr. Robert Norris will be covering this. However, beforehand, Mr. Frank O'Connell had a comment to make. Frank?
Yes, very briefly. I will be making a motion in a couple of moments, but at the last board meeting, I did represent that I had not received certain responses to questions. And upon going home and searching my emails, I found that the questions had, in fact, been answered to the best ability of the staff. And I apologize for that oversight. I'm not certain that other board members got copies of those questions and answers, but I did receive them, and I did indicate that I had not, and solely my fault. I apologize for that. Thank you.
Frank, thank you very much. Very, very professional. Okay, Robert, take it away.
Good evening. The item before you regarding Preston Park has been continued a number of times. Just to sort of recap, what we're recommending is that after reviewing the Preston Park operating and capital expenditure budget, we're down to a decision or a couple of decisions to approve the Preston Park budget for capital improvements and to approve a 3% rental increase. In our analysis, we provided three options. Option A, approve the operating budget and capital expenditure program budgets reflecting the 3% increase to replace roofs, to change out doors, windows, and install upgraded safety lighting. The rental increase that we're recommending assures that the revenues keep pace with budgeted expenses and replenishes the replacement reserve. Option B, approve the capital expenditure program and not approve the rental increase. Or option C, consider the existing FORA budget adoption of no rental increase and no capital expenditures. Again, we feel that the capital expenditure budget has been deferred, or these recommended items have been deferred primarily to roofs for going on 5 years. And so we have the money, and we feel, the staff feels that but the board should take the step to address these major items. The rental increase, again, reflects 2 years almost of deferred rental increase, and this increase still will result in the property being, on average, a lower rent than other properties, but it also keeps up with our obligation not to undercut the market for private property owners. And again, the formula used in setting the rent is consistent with what we've used since the operation of the program. And I want to close by just saying that there were two issues raised by Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell at the executive staff meeting regarding the position of the city of Marina. And I think that Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell is going to speak to those 2 points.
Frank, why don't you go ahead and speak now?
Yes, if I may, at first, I would just simply like to make a motion, and if seconded, I would just respond accordingly. I'd seek a modification of option B to be as followed. Approve the capital expenditure program subject to advance notice and consent by Marina prior to the improvements actually being commenced, and not approve a rent increase as to in-place residents only. And if I have a second, then I'll just address the issue. If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I've looked over this survey, and I have absolutely nothing against the city of Marina getting an increase in revenue from the 50% share of the rent increase that would be applied. But at the beginning of this, it was referenced that the rent of the particular units out in Marina, out in Preston Park, were 16% below the current rate. Well, upon matching up and looking at the various attachments over the several months, it appears that the actual rent for the 2-bedroom is compatible to the existing rents in the city of Marina. And the survey that was done did not separate 2 bedrooms, 1 bath with 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bath when calculating the amounts of rent, nor did it in fact address, at least I have not seen specifically, the 3 bedrooms as to how much those are as compared to the market value. There is a reference in the report to the statement that the apartments have less square footage, and as a result, that's one way of calculating the amount of the reasonable market rent. However, if you're going to do a survey and you're going to ask this board to make decisions, and you're going to not place an extra burden on the people who are living at a location in my city, then I want the survey to be as accurate as possible. I don't see this as the case, and it hasn't been for several months. Now, as to the portion of my motion relating to the right of the city of Marina for a say in the spending of the capital expenditures, please realize that the history of this is that the city of Marina has always wanted to make the improvements that were considered by the city of Marina to be appropriate, and this board has limited the improvements to be those of a health and safety nature. That's why we're at the situation that we're presently at. But The counsel for this board has submitted a memo dated November 12 of 2012 referencing the rights that he believes the city of Marina does not have relating to any say on the capital expenditures. And if I may, real quickly, the question he poses is, does Marina have the right to control expenditures for Preston Park Capital Reserve account? That's not the issue. The issue is, does the city of Marina have an equal say in it? He then brings up the question. The question now becomes, what is a reasonable contribution to the reserve account? That's not the issue. We believe that a reasonable contribution should not only in the past have been and was in the past, and it will continue to be. We don't have a problem with that. The third portion he brings up is that the rule tests the decision in question, in this case, the appropriate level of the reserve account. We don't have a problem working and having a reserve account with the necessary funds. Another reason that's pointed out, and I don't believe, in my opinion, I don't believe that any of the above was in direct response to the concerns and the rights of the city of Marina. But another reason he brings up is that Marina does not have title to Preston Park that FORA does. Well, there's a thing called litigation that is pending, and that will be decided in the near future as to who has what rights as to it. It is true that the legal title to Preston Park is in FORA, and I'm not going to get into all the different documents that, in my opinion, say the title should be transferred to the city of Marina. And finally, justification for not allowing the city of Marina to have a say as to how the expenditures in the reserve funds are used is that FORA pledged Preston Park as security to Rabobank loan. That has nothing to do with it. Rabobank is a named defendant in the litigation that exists between the city of Marina and FORA. The city of Marina never agreed to that loan. So what I'm saying is that the city of Marina has a right in the past. We've always had the budget for Preston Park come before the city council for approval, and then it went to the FORA. Now, for whatever reason, there's an attempt to remove any say that the city of Marina may have in money that is in this account that has come from the revenue in the form of rent from the tenants. So with the net rent revenue, we get 50%. The city of Marina does, FORA gets 50%. A portion of the revenue, the gross rent revenue, goes into this fund. The city of Marina has never made a donation of public funds into this account and given up our right to have a say in the funds that are there. So that's the reason I make the motion. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity.
Anytime. I'd like to have our attorney comment on what he's heard.
Well, I don't really have any comment to make. If the memo that I wrote misconstrued the question, then I'm happy to render an opinion on a different question other than the one that I understood to be the proper question for me to opine on, and tried to send this opinion out early enough in this week that we could get some feedback if there were problems like that, and unfortunately I didn't get any feedback on the opinion, and so this is the first I've heard about the problems with the definition of the issue. Obviously, the analysis of any question depends upon how the question is phrased, and so if I have misstated or misunderstood the question, I did the best I could to frame the question, and I'm happy to do it again if somebody wants to ask, or if the board wants to ask me to render an opinion on a different question.
Yeah, Jerry, just not that we're going on along. What is your legal analysis of the motion on the floor of an option B prime that requires the FORA board to provide Marina advance notice and consent of expenditures?
Well, the FORA board can do that. There's nothing to prevent the FORA board from doing that. It's my opinion that the FORA board may not relinquish responsibility that it has as owner and as and has to Rabobank to protect the security by giving some third party control over the expenditures from the reserve account. Now, Mr. O'Connell says that having a vote is not the same thing as having control. I don't know what I don't know how the votes are going to be weighted. So, but there's nothing wrong with allowing marina representatives to participate in the decision by making comments about it. But I don't think the board can legally relinquish its responsibility, and that's what my opinion says.
And what is the impact if B prime is passed on the lawsuit currently standing against FORA?
I'm sorry, what is B prime?
The giving marina advance notice and consent.
I don't think that there would be any effect on the litigation.
Okay. Okay, other board members, questions? Yes.
I just had a process. I think we're discussing a particular motion before
Right.
we've taken it out to public comment.
Right, I'm just asking the board first. So we'll get board comments, questions, and we'll take it out to the public. Any board members have any questions on the motion?
Yes.
Yes. Felix.
So what you've just referred to as B prime, I'm not entirely sure was moved for approval. I heard that Frank said he'd like to amend that option. Was your motion actually to adopt the amended option B, or was it just to amend option B and then further discuss? That wasn't clear to me.
No, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yes, no, I made a motion modifying option B as stated in the staff report. If you want, I can repeat it. And it was seconded.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. Approve the capital expenditure program subject to advance notice and consent by Marina prior to the improvements being commenced, and not approve a rent increase as to the in-place residents only. And that was seconded, I think, by Board Member Brown.
Yes, Jerry?
No, I do need to respond. No, I think I changed my view. It says notice and consent by Marina.
That's right.
That I do not think the board has the authority to do. I don't think that the board, for any number of reasons, I can go into the reasons if you want, but I know you're trying to hurry me along. I don't think the board has the legal authority to do that. Cannot give up control, and that's what you'd be doing if you said that Marina has the right to notice and consent. It's the word and consent that I have problems with.
Okay, any other board members, questions or comments? Yes, Felix.
I'd like to offer a substitute motion, and if seconded, I'd like to speak to that.
What's your motion?
The motion is to approve option A, which is to approve the operating and capital expenditure program budgets as described here in the staff report.
We have a substitute motion. Is there a second to the substitute motion?
Second.
We have a second to the substitute motion. Comments on the substitute motion?
Yeah, I'd like to start off if I could.
Go ahead, please.
I just would like to say that this was one of the very first comments that I made when I came to the FORA board, and I'm thrilled that staff has heard what I said almost 2 years ago, and actually expanded on that option very clearly. So I think that it's very well described. This has been discussed at great length with adequate analysis, and I think it's time for the board to take this step. I also would like to say that many of us took part in a site visit to Preston Park, where a lot of what's discussed here is very clearly borne out just by feet on the ground and looking at what the conditions are there. So I think those of you who weren't able to be there, take our word for it, those of us that were. Thank you.
Other questions, comments by board members? If not, let's take it out to the public. Any member of the public like to comment on discussion at hand? Please come forward.
At this time, so...
please state your name for the record, please.
Denise Turley, Vice President of the
Thank you.
Tenants Association at Preston and Abrams Park. So, Mr. Bachhoffner, so you're for option A, which is yes to capital expenditures and yes to a 3% rent increase. Yes? Correct? So are we commenting on just the motion, or are we going to get into the nuts and bolts of the mess that is Preston Park budget?
Make a comment on anything you'd like to.
I want to start with my displeasure of going to the time to go onto the internet several times this week to make sure that I had the most current information to comment on, and walking into the board meeting today and finding yet another version at the beginning of the meeting, which had I been listening to the rest of which was very interesting, and I did listen, really didn't have time to prepare comments appropriate to kind of the newest version. But I have 3 points. Won't take the whole 3 minutes. You know that a capital reserve account is built up over time as funds accrue. Unfortunately, the capital reserve account at Preston Park was, shall we say, procured in November of 2009 with the withdrawal of $392,106.50 to settle a lawsuit, Monterey County Superior Court Action Number M99606, with the then Cypress Knolls developer, and the funds have not been reimbursed to the account. So any discussion that we would have about capital improvement funds would being low, this better be the discussion first, putting that money back. So we would like that to request that we have that discussion, and that we note that in the staff reports that after the capital improvements are made, there was a suggestion as a fact to decrease the amount going towards capital improvements. We would like an updated budget summary and detail with 2012 actuals rather than proposed, because this has been continued so long in the year. The budget material as it stands now has kind of salt and pepper and a little bit of both thrown in, so it's really hard to tell what's what. And we want to make the comment that we would like to see a detailed, auditable explanation of the Alliance One methodology used to assert market rents. And Frank's comment about the stated market rents for the 3 bedrooms totally missing from the narrative. And we would like to add that the Housing Authority of Monterey County lists that a 2-bedroom would rent for approximately $1,223.
Time. Your time's up, please.
I'm sorry.
So thank you for your comments. 3 minutes for everybody. Thank you for your comments, though. Any other member of the public wish to speak on this item, this issue? Seeing none, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Levon Stone, FORA Environmental Justice. I don't hear anything about the intimidations that have been going on in Preston Park, and now we didn't know whether the Army was in charge or Marina. The city of Marina was going around in a circle of FORA, but now I hear that FORA was in charge. So the intimidation that was going on in Preston Park, and to be paying $1,400 in 2009 in Preston Park, as messed up as it was with the carbon tetrachloride, where they were digging holes in the ground to put in the pipes and hoping to put the milky stuff in there and hoping it's going to kill the bacteria, and all of the other things that had happened in Preston Park. Some of those units had not been updated. They had been painted on the outside, and the inside, even the carpet hadn't even been changed. So if FORA was in charge, and this alliance group or whoever they were the managers, are they still managing those facilities? And why are we raising the rents and for salary increases when they took $1,000,000-some and built a sports park and all of the other things that need to be done in Preston Park for the safety of the tenants had not been done? Last time I looked, there was a sign saying living here could cause cancer, diseases, and all these other things. That sign was posted by the mailbox. Nobody has ever been concerned about those kinds of things, and I haven't heard anybody talk about them. And to keep this kind of stuff under the cover, under the rug, when we're talking about increasing rents and awarding people for salary increases while other people's salaries are being cut or kept at the same level. Somebody really needs to look at how to manage this base and the people who are living here.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Gail Morton, I would urge you to consider the motion presented by Member Frank O'Connell and seconded by David Brown. And the question that I have that I didn't see in just reviewing this report, the limited portion that was out in the back, has there been a 3% rent increase in the rents in the private sector? And I understand that you tied it to a cost of living index and increase, but if the city of Marina has not had in its fair market rental values in its city a 3% increase, why should that be imposed on those in Preston Park? So that was a key question I didn't see answered here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Any other members of the public? Michael would like to address some of the issues brought up.
Yeah, I think most of these, I think Robert Norris will be able to respond to. The first comment, I think, was made by Denise Turley. The question about the funds that were used from the reserve account was part of a formal agreement that came before the FORA board, the Marina City Council. It was an adjudication of an agreement that the City of Marina had with the developer of the Cypress Knolls project. It was an obligation that both FORA and Marina had worked through in a formal agreement that was reviewed by this board. The reserve account was used because there's an obligation that remains for the Preston Park housing project with respect to developer fees, and it paid off a portion of the Preston Park's obligation for developer fees.
Sure. I will have to apologize for the revision. We just sent out the November 5th letter. Nothing in the report itself really changed, except that in Attachment B, Alliance Management updated their report because as the item has moved forward, there was an impact on the amount of annual revenue to be received, and also we wanted to attempt to capture what had been going on in the marketplace in the per square foot rental calculations so that we would have as close to what the most accurate status of the market is. In regard to the methodology, we've met with the tenant associations in the past with Denise and Paula. I'm willing to meet again. I don't know exactly what additional information she would need on how Alliance calculates the methodology, but as I review the record, a number of the changes and recommendations that have been made, we've incorporated in the information being presented. So I would be glad to meet again to go over that. But the formulas used reflect a continuation of the formulas for setting rent that were agreed upon by the City of Marina and FORA as best as I could review the records. And since the rent increase had been deferred for going on 24 months, we literally split the difference, and the recommended rent increase is a bit of a catch-up, reflecting, I think, 1.5% per year, and recognizing that last year, I believe the board approved a 1.5% rental increase and then rescinded it. It still leaves us as the most affordable multifamily rental property in the area because of the amenities. Preston Park has larger garages, storage area, and attached garages than any of the other properties. And it makes it difficult to try and get a true apples-to-apples comparison. What we do know, and my gut as being an affordable housing advocate, I know that people want to go where the properties closely resemble a home. And so you have a pantry, you have an attached garage. There was an issue of intimidation related to people feeling that it was dark when they approached their houses. Part of the upgrades that we're recommending are to put not only brighter lights, but light sensors, so that is from the time someone is within about 15 or 20 feet of their residence, the area is well lit up. In terms of the other thing on the lawsuit, I don't know, but I own the fact that I caught the difference between the November 5th letter and the August 30th letter, and I tried to get that out as soon as I became aware of it. The information in that letter does not change the recommendations or the basis for analysis. Hopefully it was probably an attempt to try and give the board as current an information that staff is working with as possible.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, we have a substitute motion on the floor and a second for option A. I'll go ahead and call for the question. All in favor of the substitute motion, option A, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, let me see the hands of no's, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ayes are 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. So the ayes have it. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll be coming back our next meeting for second vote, since we didn't have a unanimous vote the first time around. That's FORA's protocol. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the base reuse plan reassessment. Receive the final reassessment document, and Ms. Candy Ingram will be covering that one for us. Candy?
Thank you. With your permission, I'd actually like to have Michael Groves give a very quick overview of, I think many of us know why we have been what we've been working on, but I'd ask Michael if he would quickly remind us, and then we'll take comments from the public and from the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members, public. My name is Michael Groves. I'm the president of EMC Planning Group, and I'm here representing the FORA board and the staff regarding the base reuse plan reassessment. With me today is Richard James from EMC Planning Group and David Zender from Economic and Planning Systems to answer any questions, should you have any questions as we're moving along. You have the PowerPoint right behind you, so it's at the back of your head, but you also have a hard copy in front of you, so you can look at it that way, and if you don't want to turn around. The purpose of today's meeting essentially is to request the public and the board to focus on reviewing the categories that we've laid out in the reassessment document and the topics that we have. Did we get everything on the menu? You've heard that a few times before. We're asking the same question for you to look at that tonight. Did we get everything on the menu? And if we did, then let's accept the report tonight, receive it, and we'll republish that report and have it ready for the board to look at as they go forward into 2013. If you remember the process, it was a longer process than people might want to think, although everybody thought it was a pretty short process. We started in April with a kickoff meeting with the board. We had 5 public workshops. They were co-sponsored by FORA and the Sierra Club, FORA, and the land use jurisdictions. We had over 400 participants between May and June as a part of those workshops. We had over 300 emails, letters, and comment forms submitted to us between May and September. And then we had an additional special board workshop to comment on the scoping report, and we produced that scoping report, had the board comment on it, and then we did an errata to the scoping report, and once the board had given us all their comments, we republished the scoping report, and we passed that out at the last board meeting. And so why do I tell you all that? Well, I tell you all that because the scoping report really was the basis for us to look at the reassessment report. We basically combed through all of the public comments that we received. We had a market and economic analysis with recommendations that was a part of that scoping report, and we did a full review of the base reuse plan. So we combed through all of that information to come up with the 5 categories and come up with the subject areas and topics that we have for the reassessment document. The 5 categories I've talked about before are Category 1, base reuse plan modifications and corrections, which is just basically corrections to the reuse plan that need to be made. Category 2 is prior board actions and regional plan consistency. Those prior board actions are actions the board has already taken and need to be incorporated into the base reuse plan and haven't so far. The regional plan consistency is a requirement of FORA to incorporate that into the plan. So those are pretty much straightforward items, category 1 and 2. Category 3 is implementation of policies and programs. Those are existing policies and programs, and it would be those programs that are, have been implemented, those that are ongoing, and those that have not been implemented, looking at those and deciding how you want to move forward with those on a land use jurisdiction basis and on a FORA board basis. Category 4 is policies and program modifications. That's really the meat of the reassessment report. That's where we have subject areas, and we have the topics under each one of those subject areas. There's at least 50 of those to look at as you go forward in 2013 and beyond. You have this as a handout. Don't try to read it. You'll go blind trying to read it, but you have it as a handout. If you look out in the on the table, there's these handouts for the public are out on the table in the hallway. You have them in front of you. This is the subject areas and topics that we talked about in our initial presentation with the board. And what we're expecting is that you have looked at this and hopefully you feel that this is complete and you can receive this. If you have more items that you would like to add, we've been putting together an errata as we receive comments, and I'll talk a little bit about that. If you remember, we did a presentation to the board on October 12th. We released the reassessment report on October 17th. We had a special board workshop on October 30th to receive input from the public and the board. Between October 17th and November 7th, that was our public review period to receive comments, to get those comments into the board packet. We did that, and as we received those comments and got them into the board packet, we began preparing an errata to the reassessment document, and that errata was released on Tuesday the 13th, and it's basically taking whatever comments we received and combing through those comments and seeing where things need to be added to the reassessment report. Richard James did a thorough job of that and can speak to any questions you might have about that. That's why he's here today. And those comments were received after the 13th. We've received comments in the last couple days, and Richard has been just on it 24/7, preparing errata as we go along and combing through those letters. So we feel like we're completely up to date. You should have a packet that is the errata to the reassessment report. Once that errata is accepted along with the reassessment report, we will be republishing the reassessment report on CD for you so that you have it all incorporated. The reassessment report, again, for today, we're asking the FORA board to consider the reassessment report, what you have looked at. Do we have everything on the menu? Review the errata to the report, and give direction to us if there's anything else you'd like to add to the errata. Once you're satisfied with that, then we would like you to receive the report so we can then republish it. The reassessment report, again, is just a menu of items. We're not debating the policy direction on these items today. That's part of what you'll be doing in 2013 and beyond. So if you're satisfied with the menu, then we would move forward with the report. Beyond the end of this year, 2013, I've suggested to the staff and to the board before that FORA staff could ask the board to prioritize the categories, the subject areas, and the topics. Once you've gone through and prioritized those, then you could consider giving direction on various menu items. What topics do you want to look at? I'd also like to suggest to the board that what we've done in the reassessment report is not the end-all. I think the board has the flexibility to frame the topics, meaning you can frame the policy discussion any way you'd like to frame the policy discussion. And I think you have that flexibility based on the recommendations we've made for you in the reassessment report. And the opportunity to deliberate on these topic items and this policy discussion will be in the next coming years as you move forward with reviewing it. I'm available for any questions. As I said, Richard's here. He's also available for questions about it. David Sender is here for any economic questions that you might have. Darren McBain was going to talk a little bit about 2013 and beyond, and had a couple of comments before we wrap up. One other comment I'd like to make before I'm sorry, Darren, but one other comment I forgot about is we, at the last board meeting, had talked about a water table, and Board Member Parker had asked about the water table. We incorporated that water table and incorporated it into the scoping report. We then updated it. So we've got it's a minor revisions, but it's basically formatted a little differently. It's easier to read. It's got a few revisions on it to make it easier. We are going to incorporate this table into the reassessment report as well. So it's very accessible to everybody to use. So it'll be both in the scoping report, it'll be online, and it'll be in the reassessment report. One other note is David Zender prepared for the board and us a fiscal assessment. It's a very 10,000-foot level look at what are the fiscal implications to the land use jurisdictions of looking at certain topic areas. That is now available. It's a completely side issue from accepting the reassessment report, but I just wanted to let you know that we had him prepare. It's I don't know, maybe a 10-page memo, if you will, to the board. So thank you for that, Darren.
Thank you, Michael. On behalf of FORA staff, I'd just like to dovetail in with what Michael was saying about moving forward in 2013. There are obviously lots of very substantive, robust topics of public policy for the board's consideration in 2013, and it's going to be a high priority for FORA staff to work with the board to frame out some sort of a conceptual work program schedule for how to take some priorities out of this very substantive list of topics coming out of the reassessment process, and put together a workable first shot at both establishing some priorities and also moving forward to make some real world progress on these action items coming out of the reassessment process. Obviously, there are a couple of different approaches that could be taken to formulating some initial priorities. We've discussed a little bit in the past about how it could be guided by taking some of the sort of simplest action items coming out of Category 1 and 2 and moving those to the front of the line, or possibly grouping together actions that may not be subject to CEQA in terms of not meeting the definition of a CEQA project, and taking action on those as being one of the more straightforward ways to make some progress on items coming out of the reassessment. There's some other strategies like that might be efficient for making some progress as soon as possible going into 2013. Or, for example, we might want to just take a certain number of action items from each of the more substantive categories, 3, 4, and 5, and prioritize those as a first shot. But there's some different ways to come at it, and it may be desirable for the board to have a study session or some sort of a board retreat early in 2013, and staff stands ready to work proactively with the board to come out of the reassessment process and make some substantive progress on these action items in 2013 and beyond. In terms of where we are tonight with the subject matter at hand, Michael has already discussed these items that we are presenting to you as constituting the reassessment report. They are listed as items 1 through 5 on page 1 of your board report, item 8C in tonight's packet. Items 1 through 5 were described on here in terms of where we were at the time of the packet going out last week. I'll just go through them really quickly. Number 1, the draft report. That was something that we posted on our website and circulated by email back on October 17th. We also mailed hard copies to the board members the next day. So everybody sitting around the table hopefully either has a copy in your possession or has had a chance to look through the printed copy. Item 2, the errata was posted on the website in terms of the original errata, which was reflective of comments received through November 7th. We posted that on the website earlier this week, and is also handed out as part of your supplemental items, the supplemental materials that we passed out to the board members and put extra copies out at the table tonight. Number 3, comments received on the draft, was part of your packet, as was number 5, that was circulated as part of your packet, attachment C. Number 4, a scoping report that was previously received and was the subject of a formal FORA board action last month, but that is also a component of the reassessment report. Just turning really quickly to the supplemental materials, basically what's driving the supplemental materials is we received comments from the public through November 7th, and the EMC prepared an errata section based on those comments. That's what went into the packet. Subsequent to November 7th, we received some additional comment letters. There were 5 of those. We've attached those here, and that's what we always said we were going to do. What we weren't sure we were going to be able to do, but in fact we're able to come through on, is updating the errata section to reflect those additional comment letters that came in after November 7th. So that's what forms attachment A here, the updated supplemental errata. I should just point out that the errata that has been handed out tonight includes everything that was previously posted on the website, plus the new changes that were included into the errata based on these comment letters that came in after November 7th. So what you have in front of you reflects each and every comment that we've received on the reassessment report, and each and every change that we've made captured in the errata, which is basically responding to factual matters of factual correction, clarification, and additions to the text. But the long story short is you have all of that material in front of you at this point tonight. And we think we have a very complete package to present to you for your consideration. The other item here that Michael referred to as part of the supplemental materials is attachment F, and that's basically an updating and reformatting to simplify the presentation of this jurisdictional water allocations table that's harkening back to the scoping report. That's basically all I have to present on the reassessment report. I just wanted to take a minute to recognize all the hard work done by our consultant team, led by EMC, Michael Groves, Richard James, Ron Sissom, supported by Aaron Ackerman, Vicky Bermia, and EJ Kim in their office, as well as David Zender and Ellen Martin from EPS, Economic and Planning Systems, their sub-consultants, and Aaron Harwain from Denise Duffy, and of course Candy Ingram on the public outreach front. This has been a fast-paced program that we've had here for the last 7 months. This team has done a very thorough, efficient, and knowledgeable job at every step along the way, and we're appreciative of their services. So, with that,
thank
I'll
you,
turn it
good
back to
President. Let me interject real fast. We're fast approaching the bewitching hour of 5:30. I need a formal motion to continue the meeting here. If I could have a motion, a second, and we'll go ahead and vote on it. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Good. We're going to stay here past 5:30. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? You're all crazy anyhow. Go ahead. Michael, take it away.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I would just like to turn it back over to Candy Ingram.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I apologize because I think I made an assumption. I want to be sure of something. Hay personas aquí esta noche que necesitan escuchar solamente en español. No, gracias. Si tienes comentarios.
Could you talk into the mic, please?
I'm sorry. Si quieren ofrecer o tienes comentarios en español, tenemos una persona que puede traducir si necesitas. Bueno. Thank you. What I said is that I may have made an assumption in the beginning that no one was here that needed to actually listen to the proceedings in English only. So I was asking if anyone needed to listen in Spanish. And I also let people know that if they had comments that they wanted to present in Spanish, that we do have a translator here this evening that can help with the comments. So thank you, and getting back to comments now. Before we turn this over to the board for action consideration this evening, we do want to take for any further public comments, and we also want to hear the board comments. One of the things that has come to us before is that some members of the board have felt that they've not had sufficient time for their own comments. So under this portion, I will encourage board comments and then turn it back to the chair for any action that the board may wish to take. So the purpose tonight is to receive the report, to consider action to accept the report, and basically what we are asking is, are the categories and the topics that are in the report complete? And then a reminder that any content discussion on the report will actually be up to the board, and it will take place in 2013. I would ask, as we open up the public comments, that people please keep their comments to 3 minutes, that they be respectful of other people, that they please refrain from commenting, directly commenting on someone else's comment in some kind of personal way, or taking any kind of personal approach in a comment towards another person. And it would be very much appreciated if you wish to state your name when making a comment. So if I may, we'll start with
Kenny, just one comment too, one comment before the comments, and that is, we're looking for new ideas or things that have been brought up before. If it's already in the report, if 15 people go up and say the same thing, we can be here till 1 o'clock in the morning, it's not going to make any difference. So if there's something that has not been brought up before that you want to include in this report, now's your chance to do it. That's my comment.
Mr. Chairman, I had a brief comment from the board, from Mr. Farr.
I'm sorry?
Before you went to public, I had a brief comment from Mr.
Sure,
Farr.
sure.
On the topic of housing, I note on the third bullet it talks about cost of housing and targeting middle-income housing types. I understand that to mean workforce housing, affordable housing. That's the way I read it. It'd be nice in the report, given the history of that over the last 10 years ago, that to maybe describe that a little more clarity. But I've read that in the draft report, and that it gets to that. I just noted on this list here. It doesn't. It's the topic is a little less precise than it could be.
Take it away.
Thank you. Shall we go to the public?
Yep.
So there is obviously an item on the agenda having to do with the reassessment report. So if there are any public comments on the reassessment report, this would be the opportunity to comment.
Good afternoon, Board. Ralph Rubio. Several comments, but very quickly. One, in terms of jobs, I know there's a focus on life-changing kind of jobs, but there should be a focus on all jobs, all different levels of jobs for our folks here. There needs to be entry-level jobs. There needs to be an ability to move upwardly. Two, on the issue of training, apprenticeship training, all types of training, that language needs to be strengthened and tied to the state language in terms of the requirements from prevailing wage law and apprenticeship training, and enumerating the different apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs in the area that are existing that need assistance from boards like this. The other is in regards to prevailing wage, a little bit more detail in process prior to jobs being bid, notification process, not just to contractors but to all the affected unions and builders exchanges and so on, with a clear indication that it is a prevailing wage environment, and some language that ties it to the state code in terms of compliance and any types of enforceable actions. And then finally, speaking to the letter from Seaside, a clear reference to the home rule that was developed by this board in years past, and that we stay tied to that concept. The presentation by Barry really does emphasize that, but I think it really needs to be emphasized in the reassessment plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Alfred Diaz-Infante. I'm the presidency of CHISPA. I submitted a letter earlier to the clerk for distribution to the board. I do want to read the letter for the public's benefit. CHISPA urges you to continue implementation of the Fort Ord reuse plan, which you adopted in 1997. More specifically, we urge you to affirm your commitment to the community to use 30% of the former Fort Ord land to help create jobs, educational opportunities, and housing. We also applaud you for your commitment to preserve 70% of the land for habitat protection and open space. We think that's a very positive thing. For more than 30 years, CHISPA has provided affordable housing for working families, seniors, and people with disabilities of Monterey County. We're grateful for the opportunity to have provided CHISPA to develop affordable housing, that's rental housing in Phase 2 of the East Garrison project. We look forward to developing affordable housing in this geographic area within the next couple of years or so. CHISPA has witnessed firsthand the challenge families experience in keeping up with increasing costs related to the cost of living in our region. In addition to the need for affordable housing, working families need well-paying jobs and educational opportunities that are located within close proximity of the communities in which they live. This is one of the reasons CHISPA strongly supports the allocation of 30% of the former Fort Ord for creating jobs, educational opportunities, and housing. CHISPA has aligned itself in this effort through its participation with the Diversity Coalition Land Use Group, which has submitted a statement to you regarding its position in support of the Fort Ord-based reuse plan that was carefully negotiated and crafted when the Fort Ord base was closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Yvonne Stone, Fort Ord Environmental Justice. I don't know whether you've had a chance to go through all of the documents in the report, but Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network has submitted a letter also with a newsletter. It's not very well readable, but we did submit it. And I encourage you, as part of your policy, to adopt SB 12898, the Senate bill that, as mandated by government agencies from the Pentagon all the way down to our level, to be implemented when base closures happen, so that the communities, the local communities, are going to be safe and treated the way they should be treated in these kinds of situations, especially with base closures. That needs to be the number one priority for the FORA Reuse Authority, and I encourage you to please look at making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening, FORA Board. Amy White, Executive Director of Land Watch. I understand that the board is simply receiving the report tonight, and I just have a clarifying question. When the policy discussions come up in 2013, what's sort of the structure, what's the schedule? That's my only question. I'd like to sort of understand what that's going to look like in 2013. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Jody Hansen, President and CEO of the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Our letter is in the errata. I did want to make one other correction, and that's in the first paragraph. We do commend the quality of the reuse plan, and it is a master plan, and we think we should stick to the original intent of the plan. We also have seen a lot of the focus on the environment and the National Monument, which we applaud. 70%, as was mentioned, of our lands are public lands now, and I think that's really great. But we do need to keep a focus on the economic drivers and protect the designated job sites. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sid Williams. I'm a resident of Marina. I would just, this is a pretty exhaustive document that you're being asked to accept tonight, and I applaud the group for putting it together. It lists a lot of separate areas that need to be considered in whether you're going to change the base reuse plan. My only comment is to encourage you to consider how one change affects everything else down the road. There's not a project out there that won't be affected in some way by the slightest decision you make in some other area. So please consider it in that light.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Board of Directors here. I'm Luann Meter, and I have lived here on the community for over 25 years, self-employed in the ag industry, and I'm here today to represent the Salinas Valley Chamber of Commerce as the chair-elect for 2013. And first, we do support the reuse plan and the reassessment that has been done and the work that has gone into this. We really totally believe that job creation, economic planning, transportation, transit infrastructure, and forestry management practices are extremely important. And we do think that you guys have the key and understand what needs to happen here. I commend you for the 70% and the 30% that needs to be put into economic commercial development, supports our county and the future of our county. As you all know, we all have had children that have lived here and have left the area. Why? A, because they can't afford to buy a home, there's no future job prospects, and the high cost of living here. We need to protect the second and the third generations here. I'd like to keep our kids at home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gail Morton, Fort Ord Rec Users. And I just want to join, For You joins in the objections and the comments made in Keep Fort Ord Wild's letter to the board of November 16, 2012, Land Watch letter, and the Sierra Club letter of October 30th, 2012, which in particular says that until the jurisdictions making consistency request has implemented all applicable base reuse plans and programs, that FORA has no ability to do consistency determinations. This is a review. This document is a report, and I don't want, For You is urging you to understand that it is simply a collective review of the base reuse plan. It is not a reassessment. The public is still waiting for a reassessment. What I'm concerned about is your very next action on the agenda asks you to take action with regard to a portion of land that's within the base reuse plan when you haven't had your reassessment, that you're acting as if this report is some type of reassessment, and it is not. The report provides no qualitative or quantitative information to you. As part of the public, what offends me is that after each topic is listed, EMC has decided that the options and choices are presented there, that the public hasn't participated, that my representatives on this FORA board has not participated in deciding what are the options, what actions may or may not be taken in the future. Why is EMC limiting those choices? That report should not be set out that way. The other thing after each section is a summary of public comments. As stated today, 400 plus individuals participated in public comment with 335 written comments. Every comment is given equal weight. Every comment that's given is identified which comments had the greatest participation. There's one line that says the greatest public comment, the most often given, was billed on the blight first. But someone that said, I like purple roses, is given the same import as a comment that says, preserve the natural habitat. How can you have a report that doesn't have
30 seconds
any qualitative or quantitative remarks? By putting things into categories, EMC has decided certain things are just typographical errors or corrections. But in fact, some of those changes are substantive changes. How you categorize these things is also directing the outcome. And if this is not the reassessment and it's a report, it needs to be written as simply a report. The public is waiting for a reassessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Molly Erickson speaking on behalf of Keep Fort Ord Wild, which joins in the comments of Gail Morton on behalf of For You that were just provided to you. We have provided the board today with a 6-page letter. Have you received that? We didn't hear anything in the record that was received. Am I seeing a nod from the chair and the executive director? Okay. We also didn't see a copy of this letter available outside on the table to be available to the public. So you can understand why we're curious about and need confirmation of that. Keep Fort Ord Wild urges you to continue this item for several reasons. Among other things, there is an errata newly released today. We just heard that it appears to replace the errata released 3 days ago. We're not sure, but nobody here can speed read. We can't go through and compare it. It appears to be potentially significant changes, but we don't know because we haven't read it. Also today we have this untitled, undated single page. Who authored this? What's the purpose? There's nothing about it on this piece of paper. So again, the public doesn't know how to comment on this. We've identified significant problems with the report, which is being called a reassessment report. We agree with Gail Morton that this is not a reassessment. It's merely a list. It's essentially just a checklist. But you're also being asked to approve additional changes today, such as this water supply assessment. Now, the water supply assessment in your board packet was produced. It seemed to be odd. Numbers didn't add up. So those of you who brought the board packet or people who printed off that water supply assessment from the board website just before coming to this meeting, as some members in the audience did, get to this meeting and find it's changed again. There are new numbers, also which don't make sense. So this water supply assessment that you're being asked to review and apparently accept tonight is materially different from the earlier versions. It's got a new column called something like committed amount. What in the world is committed amount? There's no explanation what committed amount means. It's got main gate allocation as 0, which makes no sense because if Seaside wants a developer to build the main gate, they have a certified EIR which has allocated that water. It relied on the Seaside water allocation from FORA. 0 is incorrect. Seaside has a lot less water than this chart would have you believe. But there's no discussion. There's no analysis as to why it's 0.
30 seconds.
There's no analysis of any of this. We urge you to continue this item to December. This would allow time for the public to take a look at a lot of these last-minute materials. Now, as you may recall, the timeline presented to you all along for this reassessment process with EMC anticipated a second vote. So it's not anticipated that this report be received by you until December. That is exactly what this board should do. On top of that, item 8D, your next item, asks you to change the report, which it's asking you to receive now. This process makes no sense. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Other comments?
Good evening, Chris Mack. I also have questions. First off, this new errata program document is 20 pages, so nobody has a chance to read it, meaning all you here. So how can you vote on what's in here? How can you vote on this report when you don't know what's contained in here? So the issue about water, the Marina Coast Water District voted to approve a water assessment for Monterey Downs. Those numbers are different than what's posed in the board packet. So again, between all entities, you guys should have your water numbers all line up so they equal the same, just like any good accountant would. Let's see, I have my letter here, which is in the errata too, so I doubt you've had a chance to read it. Some of the things that I have questions on is how is the FORA board going to attend to every issue and item that's in the reassessment report? Are you going to have weekend workshops? Because you basically cannot have these things on Friday afternoons. We're barely through the third item. So how are you guys going to attend to this? Some items are very easy and some very complicated. So that's a question I have. I think you guys should work out before approving this. I had a question when I read the report. What does it say? What's it asking? What are you guys asking of us tonight? I really had no idea. Your direction to the public is very confusing and vague. And I would ask that the FORA staff and FORA board be very clear as to what they want the public to comment on each day. Here we thought we were supposed to comment on every item on the report, which is, I can't remember how many pages, 400 pages? Kind of an impossible thing. We think you guys are going to approve the report straight out. It doesn't give any kind of direction. It's not a report card of how is FORA doing this? How did FORA do with transportation, for instance? The report needs a good water study on allocations allotted and used. The report needs a good traffic study. For example, Light Fighter Drive is not listed in the report as an item, although it's the biggest in
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. It's a major off-ramp to and from Fort Ord. The report raises new questions from the public just by reading the report. So I think this process should slow down a little bit before you just nilly-willy. And then on the other thing, I see all these boards and committees passing the buck on to the next board member or next item or next vote. They'll take care of it.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, board members, staff. My name is Carlos Ramos, and I'm speaking as an individual because I was asked to read the continued names of the comments made by Miss Aileen during public comment. And because she needed to leave, she asked me to submit this letter for the record. It's the Diversity Coalition Land Use Group, statement to FORA regarding the final scoping report dated November 16th, 2012. Dear FORA board members, we are a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of elected officials and civic leaders who represent working families throughout Monterey County. She did read portions of this, and the key item she asked me to read was, so far the one area of failure in the reuse plan is job creation. She listed names that were assigned to this document, 2 supervisors, Supervisor Armenta, Salinas, 2 mayors, Ledesma and Huerta from Soledad and Greenfield, respectively, Mayor-elect Rubio, former Mayor Caballero, and trustee from the Salinas Unified School District, Philip Tabera. She wanted me to also note that the civic leaders include Alfred Diaz-Infante, CEO Chispa, Reverend H.H. Lusk, Monterey Peninsula Ministerial Alliance, Cesar Lara, Director, Monterey Bay Labor Council, Juan Sanchez, former Planning Commissioner, Monterey County Planning Commission, Aurelio Salazar, President, Salinas Council, Antonio Morales, Vice President, Monterey Peninsula LULAC Council, Nancy Valdez, President, Salinas Valley Council, Jose Mendez, Labor Leader and Community Member, Pam Silkwood, Attorney at Law and Community Member, Reverend Kenneth Murray, Coalition for Jobs, Opportunities in Business and Seaside, C-Jobs, Youth Pastor Edgar Ogario, Latino Ministers Coalition, Veronica Morales, Co-Chair, Latino Water Use Coalition, Monterey Peninsula, Marcelino Isidro, Vice President, Latino Seaside Merchants Association, Antonio Morales Jr., Latino Environmental Justice Advocates, and finally, Leticia Tapia, Comunidad en Acción, which is the Workers' Day Committee, Monterey Peninsula. This is a partial list. This is to be submitted to the board.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Pam Silkwood, and I'm actually here on behalf of my parents, Rocky and Sandy Hahn. My father, Rocky Hahn, was a civic leader for the community of Marina. Rocky Hahn Community Center was named after him. My parents owned a small business in Marina for about 30 years. The business was significantly impacted when Fort Ord closed, as was the situation for many small businesses in Marina and Seaside, many of them minority owned. These businesses limped on, and many believing the promises made by the federal government that businesses and employment opportunities would be restored under the Fort Ord reuse planning efforts. As the scoping report states, the land use planning should be based on the 3 E's: education, environment, and economy. Well, we've covered the first 2. Now we must focus on the economy. Under the declaration of policies set forth in Government Code Section 67651, the goals of FORA was to minimize the disruption caused by the base's closure of the civilian economy and to provide for the resource and development of the base area in ways to enhance the economy and quality of life of the Monterey Bay community. Somehow we lost sight of that. After putting in 15 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, at his restaurant, my father passed away, never benefiting from FORA. He and others like him were not and are not seeking a handout from the federal government. They're asking for the federal government to grant them the economic opportunities that was intended when FORA was first created. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Jan Schreiner, Marina. I came in kind of at the tail end of what I thought was 1990s thinking, something about affordable houses. We have Marina Heights, 1,050 homes yet to be built. We were promised in 2003 that they would be $150,000 to $300,000. They were not deed restricted. If they were built now, that's what they would sell for. They're not being built. We have a fence. We have no jobs. It was part of the original plan. And I'd like to mention something about the water, too. Things are changing. I understand from Joe Oliver, there is not actually a geophysical sill or division between the Seaside Basin and the Salinas Valley Basin. And I understand that Governor Brown has recently approved a bill saying that water is a basic human right here in California, which may change some things about irrigation. We also have some new thinking about a cemetery endowment parcel. It appears now in a recent meeting, these are going to be single-family homes, maybe as many as 1,500. It's hard to believe that they'd be built before Marina Heights, which has been sitting still, idle, 10 years. Is it really a new idea to put single-family homes on an endowment property, and is it really going to serve our community? I went to the Veterans Day celebration. I saw a handful, a sprinkling of veterans approximately my father's age, the age that he would have served. Those folks are still barely around. My brother's generation, some of the veterans there, maybe 2 or 3 times as many as the veterans of my father's generation. But I realized quickly that life is short. And it may be partly because of the frame of mind I'm in. I have a long list of people who have recently passed, including one of our staff members at Marina Coast Water District, Carl Nizawa, a neighbor's brother, a coworker's neighbor's son, coworker's grandmother, coworker's mother, my niece's boyfriend, a coworker's mother, and other friends' parents. And I think during this time of the holiday season, with all these passings and the elderly faces at the Veterans Day, made me realize it's really an important time for us to reassess.
30 seconds.
Thank you. And reassess in a deep and meaningful way is what I would ask each of you to do. Not in the way of empire building that we have been caught up in. Politics can be addicting. But in the way of humanity, that we are humane toward each other, that we are not trying to win something over one another, but that we are the survivors and we have things that we can agree on and that we can hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers from the public? Okay, then let's go to board comments. I know that the board members had asked previously to have a chance to make comments. So it would help us immensely right now if there are board comments. If you would please give them to us, since we will be bringing, ultimately, the final copy of this report. Nancy?
I just have a procedural question, given the order of item C and D, that under D, the board will be taking up possibly some direction to EMC staff on the report that we're scheduled to receive under C. So are through the chair or to the chair, how are we handling that sequence? Are we going to receive it contingent upon whatever further direction we may give under D?
No, we'll go ahead and if we receive the report, we'll continue on with D, just as a normal agenda item.
I don't quite understand how that will work procedurally, because then the report will be received, and then we'll amend the report possibly under D. Is that the intent of how this meeting is?
That's my
being
understanding.
run?
Michael, you want to? Candy?
Let me have Michael offer a thought on this.
It's Michael Groves again for the record. I think it's a good suggestion. I'm not suggesting you switch the items, but what I would suggest is that when you get to D, if you decide that you want that action, then you just direct the staff to direct us to include it as part of the errata that on the report you received. Just that simple.
Okay,
Is that good?
That would be fine. So I think whatever action we take under C
Right.
allows for further action under D.
Under D.
That was my only caution, that we leave that door open, because I expect that the board will want to take action under D.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Is there any other question just in terms of the presentation so far before you move into your comments?
Yes,
Nancy?
I didn't understand about the severity of the groundwater contamination until Barry gave his report today, and I'm hoping that that will somehow be looked at. Also, I understood that we would have more of, not necessarily an analysis, but of the successes and failures of FORA and what that they have done that really has been outstanding and where they need improvement. So I was hoping that there would be that to help this board with the vision that we need to come up with for the next 15 years.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. I don't have a response for that. When we started this process, we outlined exactly what the intent of the process was and provided significant information to the board about how the report would be structured, basically. Coming to first on the scoping report, it was informational. It was existing situation. Here's how it is. And then moving to this second part, which is to lay out, here are all the things we've heard thus far. These are all the categories, all the topics that we've heard from the public and from board members at various meetings. Have we captured all of that information? Because in 2013, the board will have the opportunity at that point to look at each one of the categories, each one of the topics that are within the reassessment report. Some of them will be policy oriented. Some of them will be maybe new things you want to do. Maybe there are things you want to change, but that part of the discussion comes later. What the intent of this process was to provide that report of here's how it is, and here's what the base reuse plan says. Here's where we are now. And here are some areas that people are interested in. Here are some things that need to actually be changed within the base reuse plan based on activity that's taken place between the time the base reuse plan was originally adopted and actions that have subsequently been taken by this board. But if you're looking for a new direction, that's the kind of discussion you'll have in 2013. You may want to add to that.
Michael Groves again for the record, the board member. Just a comment I would make about your question, and it's a good one. We did think about that early on in the process. We made a couple of presentations early on both at the public workshops and with the board about the successes of FORA and what was going on the success side. I thought the public did a great job of showing us what the failures were. I mean, the public had no hesitation to come out and say, this is where we think things are not going well. So we took all of those public comments, and there were lots of them, and we presented to the board and to the public what we thought the successes were. We took all of the public comments and said what things are not going well. And then if you look at Category 3 in the reassessment report, it evaluates every policy and program in the base reuse plan that filters down to the local jurisdictions. And we said, are they doing well with it? Have they implemented it? Have they not implemented it? And so that's really what the accumulation of that question was, is it's really held in Category 3.
Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Chair.
Other comments? Jane?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Jane.
Thank you. I have a few things. One is in the arena of consistency, determination, and whether we should be trying to, what should be changed to be consistent with what. And there are a couple of different places, some in Category 2, on page 3.3 of the errata. There seems to be a suggestion that we should review FORA's policies and programs to ensure that they're consistent with past consistency determinations. But to me, that's backwards. If the consistency determination wasn't actually consistent with the base reuse plan, I don't think that means we should change our policies and our programs. It means that we made a mistake in the past. So I think there are a couple places there where I think we need to be clear what we're saying and doing. And then somewhat similar, but a little bit different. There's on page 3.24 in the reassessment, it says that we need to revise the base plan to match regional plans, such as the Air District and TAMC. And I just want to be clear that in FORA's enabling legislation, local jurisdictional general plans are accepted. They are not, that is not what FORA has to be consistent with. But in the paraphrasing of that issue, EMC actually says that the base reuse plan needs to be consistent with city plans, which is an inaccurate characterization. So I think we just need to be, it's a very touchy subject, so I think we want to be accurate and clear on it. Also, on page 3.3 of the errata, it says that Caltrans is retaining the rights to the land along Highway 68 for the bypass. That seems a little bit odd to me, since that easement, that route, goes right through the national monument, which I think is not something we want to promote at this point. Then there are some edits and questions that I think I can just pass along to staff, so as to not prolong this unduly. And one category of those is that within Category 3, which is where we're talking about policies and programs that are incomplete, there were a number that have to do with Monterey County that, according to our records, are not complete but didn't make it onto the list. So I want to be able to submit those to get that corrected. And I have a suggestion. Oh, another thing that I think would be very helpful, and I don't know if this can be done either by FORA staff or the consultants, but it would be really helpful if there were a way to have an aerial view of the base and lay out the polygons. There are various maps where you can see the polygons, but you can't see the actual contours of the land and what it actually looks like on the ground. So if that were possible, I think that would be very helpful. And just in general, I would suggest that maybe the action we take tonight would be to just say, once this meeting is ended, that's it for the additions and the errata and all that stuff, and then have a complete printing of scoping report, the reassessment, so that we can have everything in one place. It's very hard to go through and then double check back on some other sheet that keeps coming forward, so that when we actually do receive it, we have a coherent piece of something that we're receiving. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Other board comments? Yes.
Well, I would like to incorporate Supervisor Parker's suggestion into a motion to accept the report, because I think Amy phrased it exactly right. There's a presumption that once we accept the report, then the important task of engaging the community can begin. So receiving the report seems to me to start that process. I remain no fan of kick the can. Let's have at it, and I think we're at a perfectly appropriate juncture to accept the report, because as I listen to the comments, and they actually fall in a couple of categories, represent a good cross section, and it isn't one here, and 10 there. You know, there's a good mix of folks here, support, concern, don't go yet, which tells me you got the public outreach right.
And, Candy, I think you're...
I'll turn it over
yeah,
back to
turn
you.
over. Okay, basically, before we get started on this with the motion and the second, I'd like to thank EMC Planning. They've done an outstanding job, I think. Most of the board members I've talked to, and speaking on behalf of the board, we appreciate all the work you've done. Also like to single out the FORA staff, not only EMC, but the FORA staff put many, many hours in this, work long hours to pull this document together. Is it perfect? No, but it's like an asymptote sort of approaches it. I think the document's important because it outlines not only the good things that FORA has done, but it also outlines many, many areas for shortcoming and improvement. I mean, that was pointed out and it was mentioned earlier. Nobody was bashful about coming up with ideas how we could improve this organization. I think I agree with Mayor Donahue. It's important to receive the reassessment report, because we can't do anything until we receive it. If we don't get unanimous approval today, it means it's going to go on to the new year. Our plan was to receive it. Hopefully, we're unanimous. If not, we'll come back in December, get it received. January, the board. It's going to be up to the board how we attack this document and how we make recommendations. We're looking at perhaps a one-day retreat. A very inexpensive retreat to save the taxpayers money, but that's one way of doing it. But it'll be up to the board to decide how to do that. So we're going to take it seriously. We are going to make the improvements to make things better. So we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
In terms of, I think the idea is to receive the report so that the flow of information stops. When could we expect to see the final complete? Would that be in December that it would come back to us?
Okay, Michael, you have an answer to that?
I think you could see the final of the report probably within a couple of weeks and be ready for 2 weeks probably ahead of the December meeting.
Understand. You're out of order. We're discussing this at the board right now. Thank you for your comment. However, there are boat owners down at Moss Landing. They're waiting for copies of this report to put in their ballast in the hold for ballast. It's so large, so we don't want to get them too large. We have a motion on the floor in a second. Call for the question.
Sure.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just had a procedural question.
Go ahead.
So there had been some questions about things like the Table 18, the water allocation. By receiving the report, we're not establishing new policy.
No.
And so if it turns out that there's, it's not adding up right, we're not. But again, I just want to be. It's mostly for the public and also my own sake that we're not. We're not suggesting that we're changing the allocation in any way by taking this action.
Jason, that's a very good point, and you're absolutely correct. Okay, yes, Felix?
I'd like to ask a question as well, and it's been mentioned in some different forms by different members of the public that have commented and members of this board that have commented. But Jane's idea is that, at least your understanding of the motion seems to be that we receive the report and that arrests further entry of evidence into the record, so to speak. So our forthcoming item 8D seems to indicate that action on that would actually be incorporated into this draft report. So what's the understanding here of the board and of the agency attorney? How is 8D going to affect the report if indeed the motion is to disallow further, comments into the draft report? I'd like clarification on that.
Jerry, you want to clarify?
Well, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I don't define that as a legal question, but as I understand it, and I think Michael should answer that question, but as I understand it, any changes that you make after you receive the report change the report.
First of all, I think maybe FORA staff can respond by Jonathan giving us an idea of what this report says about the Veterans Cemetery and how it might be different based on what Seaside's requested. That might help the board to understand.
The item 8D is more specific than what is currently in the scoping report, but it's framed in a more general way in the current scoping report right now.
So procedurally, if I could,
go ahead.
It may make sense to table this conversation and take up 8D and then see how that goes and then incorporate that into the report being received and come back to this item afterwards.
That actually makes some sense.
Through the chair.
Yes. Ian.
That sounds like it makes sense, but it really doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And I support my mayor down there, but what I mean is all the actions we're going to take after this, everything else on the agenda affects that reassessment. We're going to adopt spending more money for legal fees. That affects the assessment because that takes money away from things that we should be spending it on. So we can go down this road, and I agree with Jane where she said we just need to cut off the debate about this assessment report. And I support the chairman if you want to change it around. I'm just saying it's everything else on the agenda affects the reassessment report. Everything we do affects the reassessment report. We just want to focus on land use. And we need to get out of that mindset for right now. So those are just my comments.
Right. No, let's keep it simple. We've got 8C. If we accept the report, we can always go with 8D if we decide to approve 8D and then have that incorporated into the report after the fact. Is that not correct, Jerry? Legally? Okay. Okay, so legally we can do that. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. I'll call for the question. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Everybody opposed? Okay, let's show hands again. Everybody opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Everybody for, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion carries. Thank you very much. This will come back for a second vote in December. Okay, next item on the agenda is the... Okay, thanks, Frank.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification,
sure.
It will come back for
yes,
a second vote.
Yes.
Does this, the majority vote allow the consulting group to go ahead and produce that final report? The reason I voted against receiving it was because, to me, I think it should have been phrased that we cut off, comment and allow them to produce a final document that then we could receive. I'm hoping that this can go in a parallel track.
You want to answer that?
It says, my executive officer through the chair would like to ask the question, is that a motion to suspend comment subject to 8D?
That was not my intention. I was thinking from this evening forward, not to close off discussion of the following agenda item, but just once we get to the end of tonight's meeting, that the floodgates be allowed to close,
right,
so that EMC can produce the complete document, so that when we vote in December, we actually know. It'll be easier for us to know what we're receiving.
Jason,
if that's a motion, I'll second that.
If it requires a motion, I was just going to say it would be the epitome of bureaucracy if EMC can't complete the work, given that we've just received the report. But
okay.
And
Council,
chair,
we need, yes, Ian.
I was going to say, and through the chair, now we just pushed it back another 30 days.
No. Jerry, our legal counsel, basically we can do exactly what Jane said legally.
That's right. You
Okay.
could.
Okay.
The staff works for you. You can tell them what you want.
So through the chair, Michael Groves, for the record, our game plan is to produce the report, have it in front of you as soon as possible, so you'll have it for the December meeting, and that way you'll have all of the items that are in the errata, as well as any other decisions you make on item D tonight, in the report, and it'll be complete.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have another motion on a second. Let's go ahead and have a vote on that motion. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Jane, you're supported on that. Okay, next is 8.
That it's clear, though, its input ends tonight.
That was my intention.
Okay. 8D, Veteran Cemetery Parcel Land Use Designations. Michael will cover that. Jonathan, go ahead.
Members of the board, I'll try to keep this presentation short and succinct. So just going over some background on previous board meetings. At the August 10th FORA board meeting, the board directed staff to bring back an item to clarify previous direction and intent concerning Veteran Cemetery Parcel land use designations. And so just for background, the cemetery parcels include Army Corps of Engineer parcels E18.1.1, which is about 100 acres in Seaside, and E18.1.2, which is 78 acres in Monterey County. And at the September 14th board meeting, the board voted on a motion to direct staff to provide additional information, including draft resolution allowing designation of the veteran cemetery parcel independent of the endowment parcel. And then on the October board meeting, that motion came back for a second vote and it failed. And so also at the October 12th board meeting, the board passed the motion unanimously to direct staff to bring previously described option 2 to the FORA board for consideration. So that option 2 is described on the slide, which was to direct EMC planning to include base use plan, land use concept map, and text amendments affecting the veteran cemetery site as a consideration in the base use plan reassessment report. The draft report was completed in October 17th as a potential action item for consideration January 2013. So this is just a map giving location on the base of the cemetery. You'll see it's called out here in the middle, Veteran Cemetery, number 18 on the map. And this is the table from the staff report. Just describes parcel by parcel how many acres they are, which jurisdiction they're in, and if there's a change being suggested or no change being suggested. This map here is the same as attachment A in the staff report. It just correlates to the previous table. So, for example, item A on the map is comes up as A on the table. It's the endowment parcel in Seaside, 29.51 acres. And so just to conclude the presentation, so the action before the board tonight is a first vote on the option 2 described previously. And the staff report for this item also notes that the draft reassessment report already includes a section on the veteran cemetery. And just to specify, that section doesn't go to the level of detail of the land use map, the table, and the text amendment described in the board reports. So that concludes the presentation. Michael, do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay, we'll go for a board.
Okay, any questions by board members? Yes, Jane.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
I have a question. Yes, so as it relates to the parcels that are designated currently as open space and that we're being asked to change to residential. It was pointed out to me that in the base plan, this open space is specifically identified actually as part of a community park district. And there are several diagrams in the base reuse plan that illustrate the park. I don't know if you have them handy and you could put them up for people to see. There's one that shows the university planning area. And then there's another one. We have a pointer to help us with this one. Right.
Can you zoom in, Jen, a little bit? I'll show you. So this is figure 3.9.3 showing the seaside planning area on the base. That's one of the figures that was asked for ahead of the meeting.
Great. Thank you. And do you have a pointer so that you can draw lines around the spot that we're, so there are lots of blue lines and so people can see. Anyway, so this is a map showing in one place the community park. There's also a map that shows different community parks throughout Fort Ord, but I want to read the description on page 167 of the base plan of this community park. This district is designated as a community park that encompasses an undeveloped area adjacent to the DFAS, the Defense. The topography is gently rolling and significant portions of the designated park are covered in oak woodland. The park is accessible from Giggling Road and is located in the center of the university planning area, providing a large park area for CSUMB, University Village, the Dunes residents, and POM Annex residents. So that's one thing. Then the other issue is there are a number of community parks identified throughout the base reuse plan all over the former Fort Ord, and they're part of the overall numbers that we're talking about in terms of open space and habitat and so we have the policies require that we have these parks. The policies require that we protect oak woodlands, and my point is we can't just take a community park out without figuring out another chunk of land that is going to be replacing it and analyzing the impacts. And so I guess my question in all of this is, where are we in the CEQA analysis of these changes that are being proposed? They're actually, I think some of the policies about this are listed as incomplete in the reassessment. So my question is this going to be an action that we can take at this point?
Jonathan?
The staff report notes in the recommendation that the FORA will not be a lead agency for this project, and adopting this recommendation will not commit forward to a project as defined in CEQA. Essentially, what the action before the board is to include this in the reassessment report. Just doing that alone is not an action under CEQA, and in fact, the reassessment report has an exemption to it as well, which was described in the staff report. So this doesn't take us along the trail of a CEQA project.
Other questions by board members?
Through the chair,
Yes.
but taking land out of community park and open space that's required for the overall plan, even proposing to do that, don't you have to do some sort of analysis about whether, or suggest something as a replacement? It's just my question.
Jonathan?
Yes. So essentially you're asking, including this in the planning report, the reassessment report, is that an action under CEQA? Well, the report itself is a planning study. It's not going to make a change to the base reuse plan. It's just analyzing different options that the board would select, which is an allowable exemption in CEQA.
Okay. Jason?
I was just going to observe that the report includes all sorts of things, and we're asking for this to be added into it, and we will take particular action up in 2013, and of course the lead agency will be Seaside or the state for CEQA purposes.
Thank you.
My understanding is this is in the nature of an edit to the report. It's not a substantive decision.
Right.
I mean, we're splitting a lot of hairs. I mean, Mr. Chairman, you don't have twice as much hair.
I've lost some already this evening. Okay, any other questions by board members? Yes.
Just to give some context here, and I appreciate Supervisor Parker's questions, but could we go back to the previous slide that was asked to be displayed? Some of these documents are out of date already, and we do have city staff here that can speak to this, and Ian can probably support me on this as well. But for example, the second to the bottom line here says Seaside Residential Planning, and it says Planned Residential Extension Districts. I think those, maybe you could scroll up a little bit so we can see what that's pointing to. That seems to be pointing to Seaside East, and our Seaside East Planning study group, scroll the other way so we can see the bottom part of the map. And then maybe to the right a little bit. Hard to, sorry, the other way. We want to see the left-hand side of the map. So I'm going to, does somebody have a laser pointer? Jonathan, can you, if you point at the second to the bottom blue line that shows Seaside East, there's sort of, the former north-south road is indicated there as a straight line further to the left, all the way left. There you go. Now, right, the second blue line that's pointing a little bit higher than that, right there, that was originally conceived of as being residential. Now our East Seaside or Seaside East Planning Study Group, ad hoc group, has made a very clear recommendation to the Planning Commission of the City of Seaside and also the Council that become things dramatically different than housing, including public institutional uses, parks, and so forth. So these are living documents, and the replacement park that, in effect, you seem to be asking for, Jane, might be in that area. So that's something to consider as well. So it's not like Seaside is trying to not have parks and open space beyond the cemetery. In fact, we're very much trying to make sure that we have more parks.
You're pro-park.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions by board members?
Through the chair, got
Yes.
a comment. If my understanding is correct, what we're going to be talking about, I guess, in the new year is whether we're saying somehow there's parkland on top of the cemetery. That's what it sounds like. So we need to be careful about what we're talking about. And I think the supervisor raised a good point, but we need to not keep going back over, plowed ground. Either you're going to support the cemetery or you're not. So for us, for me, one person on the Seaside Council, I think we have not enough parks and land, but if we cannot change the open space that we once designated on Fort Ord, seeing as though we all chipped in on a national monument, then, these have to have consequences. We can't keep on taking land and saying it's open space, open space. So I'm prepared to have that argument, luckily if I'm here then, but I appreciate Supervisor.
Jane, you have a response, I'm sure.
Thank you. Actually, what I was just going to say is that what I am very much in favor of moving the Veterans Cemetery forward, and I can support taking action on C, D, E, and F, which move the cemetery forward. What I'm nervous about is starting to even suggest that we're changing maps and land use designations on other parcels. because I do think we run into a CEQA issue. So my point is this whole discussion of the community park doesn't affect the land that we're talking about for the Veterans Cemetery. So that's my point. I just think that we need to focus on the Veterans Cemetery, move it forward, not get it tangled up in some other set of actions that are probably going to get tangled up in legal action and further delay things. I think, if we care about the Veterans Cemetery, we recommend the changes, C, D, E, and F, and call it a day.
Okay. Let's go out to the public. Any members of the public like to comment on this issue?
Sid Williams, a resident of Marina and a proponent of the cemetery. To somewhat answer Supervisor Parker's question, when this all started back in the 90s, the cemetery parcel was much bigger than it is today, and the cemetery people gave up a huge chunk out to this right side of our cemetery parcel for just the purpose of habitat restoration. So we've already done our part for that. If you separate this, we've had this separation discussion before. The cemetery might be a good idea, but without that endowment parcel, it ain't going to happen. And so if you take it away, it's dead meat. Don't mince words. It won't happen without the endowment parcel for sale. And it ain't going to be for sale as open space. Okay? Now, you people have talked about this for 5 months. It's time to move forward. The people that have to decide how to use that land have told you what they want to do, and it's time to support them, so when you want to do something in your jurisdiction, they'll support you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ralph?
Yeah, open space. This parcel in 1996-97, the discussion was done. It's up to you to codify that action. To put it into reassessment, I think is extending it, kicking it down the road. The action was taken, should just complete the action and make it real. It's real to everybody here. Everybody has put in the energy. It's real to the state. It's real to the federal government. It's real to the county. It's real to Seaside. The only place we have problems is here. Now, I really get nervous when people start saying, well, we'll give this for that, because it's really not theirs to give. What we need to do is make sure that if there's an issue, it gets resolved, but let's not start giving stuff away before we know what the issue is. So, Veteran Cemetery, it's already done. Just codify the action. Make it so, please.
Talk really short right now. I've worked at the cemetery since 1994. I picked the cemetery in 1995. I was chairperson of the first committee member in 1999. I was in the ad hoc committee in 2000. I've only missed, in those years, I've probably missed, in every month we met, I've probably missed no more than 5 meetings. I am so tired as a veteran hearing people what they cannot do to stop the cemetery from being built. I'm a retired command sergeant major. I've never tried to fail. You people sitting right here have made me a failure. By you saying, I don't want this, I don't. Instead of back in the cemetery, you're fighting everything. No water here, don't cut no trees. I'm not saying you're anti-veterans, but you're sure hurting all the veterans that live in this community. And I'm tired coming here. How many times I spoke? I've spoke 5 times here. I've talked to every city in this county. I've talked 4 times to the supervisors. And these people come with charts, and they complain, where's my view graph? And I just speak out of my words. I'm sincere. I'm tired. I'm 84 years old. I want to be buried there. I'm a young man, compared to some people, my VFW post. My VFW people are 90 years old. And I hear this every month I come here, I hear the same thing. You're delaying the cemetery. You may not think you are, but you're delaying the cemetery.
Thank you, sir. Any other speakers?
Jan Schreiner, and I just want to add to that last bit. Kind of goes back to my earlier comments about how short life really is, and I think that what you have up on the screen says quite a bit more to me than a lot of really angry and emotional words. that the fact that this particularly expensive body of the government was continued for 6 years at an annual cost of $1.7 million in salaries makes me believe that there is money for a cemetery from the federal government, that it is possible for people to put their heads and their hearts together to make it happen. If FORA was only continued for 5 years, you would have enough money for a cemetery right here. So when you think about where that money goes, and think about what's really important in your life, and think about really who is doing harm to frustrated veterans by spending all that money on salaries to spin wheels. What we need to do is start thinking about how we can make government more efficient and give the people what they need. These people are voters who have fought for this right for us to discuss this, but they're being played with, I would say. Played with is a good word for it. And it's frustrating for everybody to be played with. So please, let's pull it together. Consider how FORA might be able to end in 5 years and use that money for the cemetery.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Gail Morton, Fort Rec users, and I just want to echo what Supervisor Parker has pointed out, that if you're going in and changing the land use, then you have a CEQA ramification. Nobody wants to slow down a veteran cemetery. We all want a veteran cemetery. But the other thing is you just accepted a scoping report. You have not done your reassessment. There was a discussion about an all-day retreat to decide what to do with all those recommendations. And now this very next item, you're making changes in the base reuse plan, making changes and implementing changes before you've even done and completed the process you just told us you were going to accomplish and do. Piecemealing is the difficulty that the public has, that you take each item individually instead of acting as a regional board and further the goals of your base reuse plan that was put into place for the protection of all of us. I understand that everybody here is arguing for what's in the best interest of their jurisdiction. But when you sit here collectively, you're asked to act as a regional board. Piecemealing does not act as a regional board. There are mitigation policies and programs that were demanded by the base reuse plan. You can't look this way to say, we don't need to implement those. That's what you're charged to do. So if you're changing things piecemeal, you're not doing your job. So please do not act on this positively. Let it go through the assessment process that you just adopted a report and you just set out your structure that you're going to do a reassessment. You got a report for the reassessment. Do the reassessment. Thank you.
Jack Stewart. I'm the co-chairman of the Citizens Action Committee for the County of Monterey. I'm also representing the United Veterans Council of Monterey and speaking as the former Military and Veterans Affairs Officer for the County of Monterey. This is not a new action. It was a forgotten action. December 13th, 1996, this board, not this particular board, but the Fort Ord Reuse Authority approved unanimously that the Veteran Cemetery be placed in the base reuse plan, along with the map depicting the location. It's plain and simple. This is not anything new. It was a forgotten issue that was not implemented at that time. Subsequently, this is just a correction in something that should have been done in 1996. Basically, so it's not a start again situation. This is something that was approved previously. So it's not rocket science. It's fairness. That's all it is. It's being fair. We've done our due diligence by saying that. I'm not saying me or the veterans community. the previous boards here did their due diligence. The city of Seaside did their due diligence. The county of Monterey did the due diligence, as did the Fort Ord Reeves Authority. Move this along. Let's get the cemetery going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other speakers?
Mary Estrada, a citizen of Marina, veteran. I spoke last month's meeting, and I was encouraged by a lot of the comments. I was encouraged by the number of veterans that were in the audience. Unfortunately, a lot of our veterans who would be up here speaking right now had to leave. I noticed a lot of other members here also decided that they needed to leave rather than to take care of this important business. I just want to also let you know that since I talked last month, I buried 2 of my fellow veterans. And they didn't get buried in a veteran cemetery like they should have been. People that have worked long and hard to try to get this cemetery built. And I just ask you to put aside all of the arguments and get this cemetery built. We owe it to our veterans now and our future veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other speakers?
Can I ask the board Can I ask the board members to turn around? I have a slide presentation for you. Jerry. Thank you. Okay. We all want a veteran cemetery. This presentation is to show that, first off, I did a records request asking if federal and state funding for the proposed veterans cemetery is tied to a particular parcel or parcels. FORA's response: the endowment parcel will be made up largely of local and private funds. The military code says it does not tie a particular parcel or parcels to funding the cemetery. Next slide. The above funding, I asked if there was a document saying the above funding cannot be allocated to another site. The code says it limits the Central Coast Veterans Cemetery site to the former Fort Ord, which is saying that anywhere on the former Fort Ord. So this site has conflicts, and that's what we're trying to resolve here. So far, FORA has not produced any records that show the funding is tied to any one parcel or parcels, period. Okay, so here's the site by Parker Flats, heavily forested, high environmental impact, which is a lot of us are opposing to. Here's what the assumed landscaping of a veteran cemetery would look like. Tombstones with flags, fuzzy green grass, whatnot. Very nice to go to, hang out, remember your loved ones. This is what the proposed cemetery was going to look like. The tombstones are laid around beds of gravel and decomposed granite. Basically a desert, so you're taking a forest and turning it into a desert. Meanwhile, Monterey Downs, which is tied to the Veterans Cemetery, thanks to all of your voting, is getting a green grass, and on their racing track they have 11 acres of turf that they water with something like 27 acre-feet per year. Thank you. So here we go. Here's the site again. Steep topography equals high construction costs. Right now, the construction cost of the cemetery is around $25 million, excluding mitigation costs, road infrastructure, and such. So I could easily raise for between $30 and $50 million. Are the feds willing to write a grant for that?
30 seconds.
Okay, alternate sites along General Jim Moore. There's access. General topography equals low construction costs. Few trees equals low environmental mitigation, faster build out. Can the cemetery be built for less and faster on another site with less contention? As it was pointed out by Felix, thankfully, that previous map, he pointed to where this land is. Few trees, low scrub. It's in the city of Seaside East. And as he stated, they have other plans for it. It's up in the air. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers today? If not, I'll bring it back to the board. We have a staff recommendation, which I believe follows Seaside recommendation, to direct EMC planning group to include the BRP land use concept map and text amendments affecting the Veterans Cemetery parcel of consideration of the base reuse plan reassessment report. Do I have a motion?
Move approval of option 2.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay,
I'd
yes.
like to quickly just address something, just so we're totally clear here, because my name was just invoked in reference to a map that I did not supply. Somebody else supplied it. But CSUD is very clear on being interested in the cemetery being at the location that is proposed in this staff report that we've all discussed at great length, not in East Seaside or Seaside East. So that is a non-starter. We've always said that this is where the cemetery is supposed to go. Everybody's in agreement with that. Nobody has yet identified any alternate site that it could be possible. Basically, everything is already spoken for. So just because there's, it's not ironed out exactly what's going to happen in Seaside East does not mean that the city would like to see a cemetery there. I think we've been very clear on that.
Thank you, Felix. Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor,
If
yes.
I can speak to my motion?
Yeah, go ahead.
I strongly encourage my colleagues to try to get to a point of a unanimous vote tonight. I think that we can, and I'll say to my colleague and friend Jane Parker that I feel very strongly that this is not a CEQA action, an action under CEQA. I think if you look at the action, just as the action under C was not a CEQA action, and all we're doing is adding to see how could this possibly be a CEQA action. And so if you choose to vote against this, I just want it to be clear on the record that I do not believe you can be hiding behind the CEQA concerns. If you vote against it, I believe, needs to be for other reasons, and I don't know what those reasons would be. I'd like to further say that the CEQA and probably NEPA process, because there's federal dollars involved, need to be done by either Seaside or the state. And through that process, we'll work through many of the issues. That's one of the points of CEQA and NEPA. What we're asking for is that we get started on that process. Further, I think that we need to do what FORA can to, and this is not part of the motion, but it's, I'll say it anyway, encourage and facilitate any action that needs to happen to enable the transfer to the state. And I don't know whether that is a CEQA action, but I hope it's not, because I hope that ultimately the state, I think, is the logical lead agency for this. And that we need to work in the very short order to develop the funding mechanisms to make sure that we have the requisite funds by June 30th of 2013. You've heard me lay down that line. I'm going to hold firm to that line. Shame on us if we don't have $1.5 million by June 30th of 2013. This is just a procedural step. We need to take it tonight, and I implore the board to try to get to a unanimous vote so we can put this behind us. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason.
Mr.
We have
Chair,
yes.
If Mayor Burnett is interested in a unanimous vote, I will tell you, as I said, that I can support the changes that move the Veterans Cemetery along. As Mr. Stewart mentioned, it has been long designated in this site. It's appropriate to take the action to get it, on the map, but not the endowment parcel. That needs to go through a process if we're to find another community park as a replacement. It needs to go through the proper process, or we're going to end up creating more problems than we solve.
Mr. Chairman,
One second.
Supervisor.
Yes, Dennis.
I'm going to echo Mayor Burnett that tonight is the night we should be unanimous, and I would simply suggest, with all due respect to Supervisor Parker, that when I hear Seaside, the mayor-elect, and veterans talk about what the city did visibly, publicly, demonstrably, and that the county was involved in it, that there is a clear living testimony and a record that can be resourced, and I take note that the current mayor made it a point, not much of a secret, I I like to get on with things, but in this case, I admire his attention to detail and said, "Hey, we got to clean some stuff up." And so, in that spirit, Seaside came forward. So that's number one. And I think we have clearly heard from the veterans. It's time. Enough is enough. And I think Mayor Burnett said it right. And I would simply ask for those who respect process, then to observe process, because and I certainly yield to both the supervisor and the mayor and their knowledge of it. Then let the process work. We don't need to keep pre-processing process. Let's get on with it. And so I would just strongly encourage that we see if we can get to a unanimous vote tonight as well. And I echo Mayor Burnett's sentiments.
Thank you, Dennis.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'll make an observation. I echo Mayor Burnett and Mayor Donahue said. The argument that essentially the board is being asked to edit the report. If a particular edit of the report implicates CEQA, then any edit of the report implicates CEQA. So I think the logical extension of the supervisor's argument is that any errata, any change in the report implicates somehow a CEQA decision. It seems to be where that heading, and that's not the case. So I think the argument that the board should not adopt this tonight because there's a CEQA implication doesn't stand scrutiny. And I think there were some comments in the public that implicated that this was somehow changing the land use designation of that site. This is not. This is changing words in a report to FORA about how the site is described. It's a description. It's a photo caption. I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but it's not much more than that. So the argument about CEQA seems to be circuitous and doesn't really hold scrutiny.
Thank you. Jason?
And I'll just, again, I'm hoping that we can get to a unanimous vote, and so that's why I'm taking a little extra time to make this point, which is that we will have the process in January to further go into your concerns and any of these concerns. So I think that if we can get this done tonight, you've articulated those questions, and I'm sure that staff heard them, and so when further action is taken, we can get into those. But this is simply making sure that this is on the table so that Seaside can continue moving its process and we can continue moving forward with our process. It doesn't it doesn't preclude you and others, including I'm sure other members of the board or the public, from continuing to ask these questions.
Yeah, I'd just like to say it's not a secret that there's a significant minority that is against Monterey Downs. Okay, fine. There are reasonable people for and against the project. But to try to attack the Monterey Downs through land use jurisdictions or whatever, which would end up perhaps killing the Veteran Cemetery for lack of funding, is probably not the way to go. That's my own personal opinion. So we have a motion. Yes. Ian,
yeah, I was trying to get in. Thank you. I appreciate that, Michael. My comments just it's going out to the public. Everybody does not support the cemetery, and now we see it again. You know, I have much respect for the supervisor, and this is not towards you, Jane. It's just, when have we ever heard about that piece of parkland on the endowment parcel before? So every time we come up to this, they're going to throw out something to try to slow it down. And we have to respect them for that. We have to respect them for doing what they want to do. But it's up to us to do what we need to do. So I'm not mad at them. You know, I'm wondering where we at and how strong we're going to be. And I just take a minute because someone said that really kind of upset me, where it was mentioned that we went to a veterans function and the veterans were sparse. You know, they were dying out. This veteran cemetery is not for the old veterans. It's for veterans. It's for veterans that come to this. Veterans within, 95 miles of this cemetery. So I support that. And it's hard for me to sit up here as a person that served and have other people say that's not significant enough. You know, we keep talking about it's not good enough. It's not good enough. We can't cut down those trees. Well, just come out and say you don't want no development. And what we should ask, and I would ask the veterans or anybody that's concerned with the cemetery, if we don't put the cemetery there, are you open to putting something else on that spot for economic development? And the answer would be no. So then it is trees against the veterans. Let's be the, you know, this is 5 months, and now we're down to a simple request to put this in the report. This is not pushing the cemetery no further than what it was yesterday. So we need to start asking the hard questions and making people answer the hard questions. You know, if we move the cemetery, can we use that parcel for other development? And you'll get your answer. And then, by the way, who else has the land for you to go to? And I thought I'm going to finish up, Chair. I thought the representative from San FAR was going to reiterate the statement, which is the government is not going to support movement of the cemetery. So either we're going to support it here or we're not. Thank you.
I will. I mean, the VA and the California VA have invested in this process. It's not a simple matter of picking up stakes and moved. Yes, it could be moved. It would add delay to what we already have. So it's several number of years. We don't know how many, but it would be delay. And you know, and that's it. I mean, it's not as if the federal government has picked this site, but it would involve a substantial delay in moving it. Mr. Farr has been committed to this site since the mid-'90s, and we're not interested in seeing it moved at all. I mean, it's invested in this site. That's where it's picked, so move forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for the fourth time, we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second. Call for the question. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. I think the veterans appreciate unanimous support on that. Thank you very much. Okay, it's after 7 o'clock. I know we're enjoying ourselves here immensely. The next item of business is the adjustment to the fiscal year 2012-2013 budget. Jerry Bowden, I believe you got the lead on that.
Yeah, the staff report, I think, is self-explanatory as to what the proposal is. The reason is very simple. We've been forced to incur very substantial additional legal fees, and if things continue as they are, we will that trend will at least continue at the same rate. It may become worse, and so we're recommending that you augment the budget in the amount that's outlined in the next to the last paragraph of the staff report.
Any questions by members of the board? Any questions by members of the public? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
A Budget and Finance Committee, where does the money come from?
Where does the money come from?
I have no idea where the money comes from.
We do have a reserve that we have maintained that is approximately 6 months of our operating cost. This would have to come from those reserves. I think our actual reserves we anticipated at the end of the year would have been more like 9 months. This would reduce it to more like 6.
Okay, any other questions by board members? Yes.
Through the chair, yes.
Yes, Ian.
But this is a result of being sued to stop our progress.
Right.
And I'll just say for the board, we need to get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing, because we only got like 6 years to go, so to speak, and get away from land use in someone else's jurisdiction. It's certain things that FORA needs to accomplish, and we need to stick with that and get sued over those things and not get sued over land use. Okay. So we can't afford it.
Yeah. To sue or not to sue, that's the question. Okay. Any other questions by board members? Out to the public? Any questions by members of the public? All right.
Ron Cheshire. Politics. There should be no question in anyone's mind this evening as to why I brought a copper bowl and a whip instead of my 14-inch scimitar knife. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Any other members of the public? Back to the board. Do I have a motion? Okay, move for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Boy, that was quick.
Yes. Sorry, I have some comments and concerns that I think that would best be raised in
a closed session personnel evaluation. I know that's been requested by our attorney in the past, and I will reiterate that request, that we make that a priority, and I defer to the process if that goes to the executive committee first, but
Right.
that it does, my request is that after the right process, it does come to the full board, so that we can raise and address those questions.
We'll agendize it on the executive committee and then go from there. Thank you, Jason. Okay, the next one, new business, 2013 FORA legislative agenda. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edel and members of the board, the legislative committee pored over the draft legislative agenda in considerable detail. After it was approved and adopted by the legislative committee, it then was reviewed briefly by the administrative committee. The Monterey Peninsula College representative recommended an adjustment in item number F, as you'll see on page 122 of 138. And also on page 122 of 138, the City of Marina's representative recommended an adjustment in the title and 4 extra words or 5 extra words to be included in item E. And you also see under proposed position, support funding to clear buildings in areas slated for development. So these are 2 minor adjustments. The executive committee did not see a reason to bring these adjustments back to legislative committee, and the executive committee and the legislative committee are recommending board action on the legislative agenda. If any of the board members would like to ask any details on any of the items included in this legislative agenda, please feel free to contact me, but I will not go through each and every one of them for time reasons tonight.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
Jane.
just a quick question on item E about the base-wide and CSUMB building removal impacts. I can see why it was originally just lobbying for state funds because it had to do with CSUMB, but as we make it broader over the entire base, should we include lobbying for federal funds as well?
Yes, in fact, if you look at the proposed position, it includes federal support. And we have been working with CSUMB on a request for the Office of Economic Adjustment and along these exact lines.
Thank you.
Other questions by board members?
Yeah,
Yes,
on the
Felix?
same topic there. I fully agree that it should be base-wide and CSUMB building removal, but previously this was clearly written to reflect CSUMB. I think maybe this language needs to be improved a little bit so that we're clear that it really is base-wide, because as you delve into it, it almost exclusively refers to CSUMB. So that's not against us supporting this legislative agenda, but I think it should be cleaned up a little bit so that, as we refer to it, we know exactly what we're talking about.
Staff can rewrite it to include that.
Yeah, if that's the direction of the board and a motion to approve or whatever the board's choice, we could bring a revision to this particular item back to the FORA board for their information next month. That is consistent with the comment made by the City of Marina with respect to this. That's why the title has been changed specifically. And but I do want to remind everyone that this is part of an agreement we have with CSUMB that settled the lawsuit we had for some time. So there is some reason for some of the language in here that's an outgrowth of the lawsuit.
Yes, Jason.
I'm sorry I didn't raise this with staff earlier, but I'm seeing it now. That the Veterans Cemetery, I think it would be helpful if it included language that we would desire that the federal government modify its policy that currently precludes a federal cemetery. I know that is not the primary track that we are on, but if we were successful in getting that, it would be a huge benefit for moving this forward. And I've talked a bit with Congressman Farr, and I would be prepared to see what meetings, at least, I could get at the White House to work to make that case. But I would like to do that under authorization of the FORA board.
That could be a simple sentence amendment to the proposed position. That would be to continue to work with appropriate federal agencies and the 17th Congressional District to secure language adjustments that would enable additional federal funding for the cemetery.
Federal funding or federal status. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The change, the particular restriction that causes the problem is the 50-mile
right
limitation, and if that could be amended to say 45,
That's right.
we'd be all right.
That's exactly where I'm going, and I think that language would give, I think, the go-ahead that we could then represent the FORA board position.
I think that could be considered a minor change. I don't think the legislative committee would have to see that again if it were included under proposed position.
Good. Any other board member comments? Out to the public, any comments from members of the public? Okay, back to the board. Do I have a motion?
Move approval of the
With the amendments so
with the
stated.
amendments as
Okay.
discussed.
Second. Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And we now have the executive officer's report. Michael?
Yes, all the items in the executive officer's report are informational items. I received no questions on any of those from board members, so that will conclude my report.
Thank you. Items from members, I'll start this off very quickly. We did receive the forensic audit. Came in yesterday. It's 200 pages long. It's very, very detailed. The committees consist of Mayor-elect Bill Camp of Pacific Grove and myself. We've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. It is very, very thorough. We're going to try and get this out to all board members on Monday to give everybody a maximum amount of time to go through it in detail. The procedure, I believe, we've sort of agreed to is go ahead and we're going to put it, agendize it on the executive committee. The executive committee will meet and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and really, really go into it. It's 200 pages with some very good recommendations. Once the executive committee is finished, we will go ahead, put together a report, recommendations for the full board. It'll come before the full board with the public to show how we're going to make modifications and improvements in our reimbursement procedures and so forth, so that FORA will have hopefully the best rules and regulations with regard to reimbursement ever. So it was money well spent. And Bill, did you have a comment on this also?
Thank you, Chair Edelin. Yeah, I was actually very pleased to see what the report showed. And in very broad terms, one of the things that was very reassuring is that, for example, in personal expense filings, the documentation was extraordinarily complete. We did find in the report a few items that are not entirely consistent with reimbursement policies, and I'll raise questions to the executive committee and ultimately to the board in terms of what action should be taken on those. We had a wonderful set of recommendations procedurally and policy-wise in terms of what our expense reimbursement policy and travel reimbursement policy can be, and the ideal would be that at the end of this we will have a model ordinance or model policies that not only will guide FORA but also could be adapted by other jurisdictions, because certainly we've seen recently in the papers some indicators as Virginia Hennessy has done her articles that other folks might want to take a look at their protocols as well. But I think as you read the report, you're going to see this is a very good document.
The FORA staff should also be congratulated with their full cooperation. That's one thing we kept asking the auditors. They came in here and they said they had total 100% cooperation from the FORA staff. Good aspects, areas for improvement or whatever else, nothing was hidden. It was wide open. So again, the FORA staff, we have a professional group that's supporting us, and they deserve to be congratulated on that. Okay, any other items from members? Yes, Felix?
I just want to thank both you and Bill for doing such hard work on this. As you will recall, I was the first person to bring this up at executive committee, and it wasn't quite my intention to put so much work on board members and that it would be done more largely by an external consultant, but I know that you guys have worked very hard on this as well, so thank you. And thank you to the board and also the executive committee for agreeing that my idea was good, and everybody's just piled on. I think FORA is going to stand much stronger as a result of this.
You forget we don't take thanks, we take cashier's checks and beer. Okay. Other board comments?
Yes. Kind of an administrative thing for the meeting setup. I'm finding being on the end of this very long and straight table, I feel very isolated down here. And I think as we set up the room, we've got some space where we can kind of curve the front row here a little bit so we can see each other and participate more effectively with each other, and still leave plenty of room for the audience as well. So I would like to make that hello. I'd like to make that request for the next meeting setup.
I wasn't even sure you showed up tonight.
Exactly.
Okay, any other items?
Well, just to point out that we do have a few restrictions, the room size and the fire department and certain things. For some meetings, we will have to maybe come back to this format, but we can make adjustments so that folks have a better chance to see each other.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much for coming. We really enjoyed 4.5 hours. We'll try and find a way to cut this down in the future, I promise. It's a Friday night. Thank you.